Just over 3 years ago, Matt and I took over Liberty Dispatch from Mike and Tim. And in that time, we've aired some 250 episodes together. That includes interviews, news briefs, and conference features. In that time, as you know, we've been able to interview some of the most amazing guests, cover some of the most absurd stories, and help Christians in Canada navigate difficult and faith-testing waters since the COVID era began. Tonight, I hang up my podcasting jewel-encrusted tinfoil crown, and I replace it with a regular guy tinfoil bomb suit just to be ready for the days ahead and say goodbye to hosting Liberty Dispatch. I know you'll miss hearing me rant about the raging, flaming hot dumpster fire that is Canada, and I'm going to miss it too, but I want to remind you of something. Christmas is 1 week away, and here are some words from one of Martin Luther's Christmas hymns, From Heaven Above to Earth I Come. Were earth 1,000 times as fair, beset with gold and jewels rare, she were yet far too poor to be a narrow cradle, Lord, for thee. Ah, dearest Jesus, holy child, make thee a bed soft, undefiled, within my heart, that it may be a quiet chamber kept for thee. My heart for very joy doth leap, my lips no more can silence keep. I too must raise with joyful tongue that sweetest ancient cradle song. Glory to God in highest heaven, who unto us his Son hath given, while angels sing with pious mirth a glad new song to all the earth. It's December 19th. I'm Andrew DeBartolo. That's Matt Halleck, and for the last time for me, this is Liberty Dispatch.
Hey, and welcome back, friends, to Liberty Dispatch for this very, very, very special 350th episode, where we will continue to bring you conservative Canadian news and analysis from an unapologetically Christian perspective. Wherever you're getting us at, please be sure to like, subscribe, rate, review, share it with whomever you can, especially this episode, because you're absolutely not going to want to miss any of the wonderful interviews that we have with our 7 amazing guests, all of whom have been integral to the show, to our thinking, and especially share this out as a way to thank my beloved co-host, Andrew, for all the work that he's done over these many years and providing us with not only great commentary, but, you've curated so much of the news stories that we've covered. You've been really the brains behind so much of this as I've done the technical side of things. Andrew, it's great to be on with you as a co-host for one last time, and we have a wonderful episode set up. So if you want to see all our episodes, including the extended full-length interview with our 7 amazing guests today, you're going to have to go over to ldcanada.substack.com, ldcanada.substack.com. Check us out over there. Become a paid subscriber. There's so much good content behind the paywall.
It's like 5 or 6 hours of interview content.
Just from this one episode.
Yeah, it's a lot of stuff.
One episode. It is wonderful. All our guests were amazingly gracious, giving us their time and their insight. And I can't think of a more fitting way for you to drop the mic one last time on your podcasting career here, Andrew, than to have a 350 extravaganza with some of our favorite guests and commentators and thinkers. So it's a wonderful time, and I'm glad to be here. How are you feeling, Andrew, on the occasion of your last episode?
Well, it's been a fairly eventful season in the life of our family and our church and our school.
Hmm.
So our school is actually moving, and we will be spending just this last week here, and then we will be opening up and beginning school at a brand new location on January 5th. So that's a big deal.
Yeah.
I mean, there's 5 kids, 2 twins. The twins are just over 2, so that's going to make Christmas a little crazier because they can actually open the gifts and run around and
Yeah.
choke on things. So it's been a very eventful season here with wrapping up the year, thinking about Christmas, work-related stuff. So I'm very excited and anticipating the next couple weeks, especially, but also beyond that into the new year. There are some really neat things happening, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. If you can make it all the way through all the episodes, kind of toward the end of the show, we're going to talk a little bit more about kind of what's next for us, the happenings, bring kind of up to speed going into the new year. So yeah, I'm excited, and I'm going to be climbing out of the sewer, as Alex Kloosterman has called me, the Canadian sewer rat, deep diving into the garbage that is Canada and its news cycle. I'm going to be making my way out of the sewer back up to the surface to take a breath of fresh air, and maybe I'm going to get a little bit of this stank off me. So that'll be good.
Then yeah,
That'll be
exactly.
good.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
it's definitely an exciting time, and as I think everybody knows, this is just one of the many things that you and I are both involved in. So I'm
Mhm.
sure having more time for those other very worthwhile labors that you're doing is going to be something that blesses you and your family. I know that. So, Andrew, lead us, dear friend, throughout the rest of the episode.
So, one of the things that I can say unequivocally is that we've made a lot of good friends, built great relationships, and the sponsors on our show are not just people that give us money
Yeah,
to
man.
advertise for them. These are people that we avail ourselves of their businesses, of their services, and these are friends. These are actual
Yes.
relationships with people we have. And so, kind of
Mhm.
our long-standing sponsor, someone who's been with us since the very, very beginning, our friends over at Rocklink Investment Partners. So it's a privilege to be able to one last time tell you about why it is you need to be connecting with them and availing yourself of their financial services. Because despite mounting pressure in recent years, DEI and ESG initiatives remain deeply entrenched and actively promoted by major financial institutions and investment firms. These divisive ideologies could be channeling your hard earned dollars toward causes that clash with your core values. Protect your investments and ensure they align with your principles. Rocklink Investment Partners are committed to guiding Christians in building a secure financial future while investing in harmony with their faith and biblical stewardship. You can reach out to Rocklink today by calling them at 905-631-5462 or send them an email, info@rocklink.com. That's link with the C, info@rocklink, ROCKLINC.com. So like Matt mentioned, we thought what better way to celebrate a 350th extravaganza and also go out like George Costanza did with a good joke, I'm out, and then leave on top. Then I was chatting with my wife about this, saying, "Hey, here's what we're going to do for the 350th episode. We're interviewing this guy and this guy and that guy." And she's like that seems like the opposite at the time. I'm like, "No, you got to go big. You got to go big. That way they don't have a sour taste in their mouth." So we got to interview 7 amazing guests who several of them have been on the show more than once, more than twice, more than thrice, and
Mhm.
some only once. And it was amazing to get them back again. So the way this episode is going to work is we are going to be playing for you short 10 to 15-ish minute clips of the interview, the parts that we think are worthwhile for you to see. And then interspersed between those clips are going to be some thoughts about the show, some ad reads, a very nice letter written by one of our listeners, some discussion about things, and we're gonna talk through this in between the interviews to mix it up a little bit. And again, the only way to get the full interviews, and you're going to want to get the full interviews, is to become a paid subscriber over at ldcanada.substack.com. com. Absolutely. So the first thing we want to do is we want to show you the discussion that I would say we, except because of technical difficulties, I was unable to join. But
Sadly.
Matt had an amazing discussion with Dr. Joe Boot, and we want to play you just a portion of that now to whet your appetite so that you go and subscribe and get the full interview.
Next on the program, we have Dr. Joseph Boot. He is a Christian thinker and cultural apologist. He's founder and president of the Ezra Institute for Contemporary Christianity. He is husband to Jenny and father of 3 amazing children. He is also adjunct instructor for culture and apologetics at Bryan College, Tennessee. And he served as the founding pastor of Westminster Chapel, Toronto for 14 years. Now residing in his home in Great Britain, Joseph has worked in the fields of Christian apologetics, worldview education, and church leadership for over 25 years on both sides of the Atlantic, and has spoken and guest lectured globally. Dr. Boot, thank you for joining us again on the Liberty Dispatch. It's wonderful to see you again. We just saw each other in person in California not too long ago, but I understand you've made it home safely by God's grace.
Well, it's great to be on the show, Matthew, and always good to see you. Yes, I thankfully a long hike back from a West Coast short speaking tour in San Francisco and San Diego, or just outside of San Diego. Glad to be home for a few days before sallying forth again before Christmas to Phoenix.
Yeah.
I'm going to be speaking at America Fest. So, yeah, busy time before a nice Christmas break with my family.
Well, we're thankful to have you on, Dr. Boot, because, you've been a faithful servant of Christ, not only in Canada, across the globe. You were so much a part of, even the origin story behind Liberty Coalition Canada, the Liberty Dispatch, not specifically working on that stuff, but I do feel without you and some of the efforts like with Dr. Rock and obviously our friend Dr. Michael Thiessen, this whole situation wouldn't exist. So we're thankful to have you on. And especially it's good timing because you just released your latest book, Think Christianly, which I have right here in my hot little hand. I've been working through it, and it's a wonderful read. So we did want to have you on the show to think Christianly about various subjects, because honestly, us in our more specific colloquial way try and think Christianly about everything. So why this book now?
Well, I think we've been seeing, obviously, the ongoing attack on the Christian faith from all sides, actually, a truly biblical faith on all sides. And actually, with that broad attack on biblical world and life view, Christian worldview in the culture, has actually been an attack on the very idea of Christian world and life view, of the concept of worldview as an organizing principle and its value for engagement with culture. That's partly because there's been and I actually talked about this quite a number of years ago, that eventually in a radically de-Christianizing context in the West, that we would eventually see movements that in trying to, find their way back, as it were, try and find a solution to the problem, would reach back into really the medieval world and the pre-modern world to try and find solutions, and not necessarily seek to ground themselves in a distinctly Christian world and life view. And so what I've tried to do with this book, in many respects, is to give a reason, a defense for why thinking Christianly about everything is so important. In the early chapters, I try and lay a foundation for what thinking Christianly really is, what it means, and then some core foundational areas where it applies, and then try and illustrate that in the second part of the book, really, in applying it to specific cultural issues and cultural challenges that we're facing. So, yeah, I felt that the book was kind of pressing in on me. I've always believed that you should only write a book that you feel is being forced out of you. If you're having to force a book and try and sort of make it happen, that maybe that's not the right book to be writing. But if the need is there and something needs to be addressed and clarified, and so I do hope that I've always believed that the Christian worldview thinking and application is a form of prophecy and cultural prophecy, and so this is a moment where that's urgently needed.
Yeah, and I think it's extremely timely because, as you may make mention, we live in a moment where, believe it or not, Christian thinkers, public intellectuals who are out there have platforms, that large Christian platforms, are subverting the idea of worldview even being a helpful category to use, a helpful terminology, or whether it actually reflects anything. So that, I think that's why this book is, as much as it is like an evergreen foundational principle book, it is also very timely in its release as well. So I was interested in, you made mention in that kind of reactionary kind of turn, people are returning to the medieval mindset, right? You have a lot of those men, the same men who are, poking at worldview and kind of trying to subvert that term. They're trying to essentially, as you said, reclaim a medieval mind. And so far as that, pertains to remystifying the world, having a supernatural outlook on life that the medievals would have had, kind of as far as that undermines our secular narrative, I think both you and I are thumbs up to that project. But what is some of the dangers? Because you talk about your early chapters, first chapter, Think Christianly About Everything. And in it, you point to the dangers of returning to a medieval mindset, because within that medieval mindset, there was dangerous dualisms that were brought forward in Christian thinking throughout the ages that was really adopted by a kind of Greco-Roman mindset. So maybe you can help us think Christianly about everything by kind of pointing at why there might be a danger at returning to the medieval mindset if we're not doing so very critically, with the Bible open in our hands as we're thinking through these things.
Mm-hmm. Well, the medieval world in the West, what we sometimes call Christendom, was a synthesis culture, and you've already highlighted it. And this is inescapable reality. It was a culture that emerged out of the Roman Empire and the Greco-Roman world that was steadily being Christianized. And just like any missionary today who goes to another nation from the West, perhaps an African or a South American nation or an Asian nation, has to, in sharing the gospel, has to help people understand how the gospel applies to them. And then as those people come to Christ and are converted, they begin to go through a process of being liberated from the assumptions, the false religious assumptions of the religious culture that they inhabit. You often get elements of folk Christianity. So, for example, if you take South America, where Roman Catholicism penetrated quite deeply, you will often find that the older folk religions, elements of occultism, the magic arts, and so forth, are still very much present in the thinking of the people, even though they profess a Catholic faith. Now, that's a contemporary illustration of what was going on when in the Greco-Roman world, when people were being converted to Christianity in the early centuries. Many of these early converts were not just influenced by the whole polytheism of the ancient world that they're leaving behind to embrace the Christian faith, but they were often schooled in the philosophical framework of the classical world. And so some of the early apologists, some of the early Christian apologists are profoundly influenced in their thinking by Platonism, by Neoplatonism, by Aristotelianism, and so forth. And you see Augustine, actually, the great North African church father, steadily wrestling with the Bible in relation to his Neoplatonic and Manichaean philosophical background and baggage, and trying to gradually liberate himself from those religious assumptions. And the medieval world, in many respects, emerges as the Roman Empire is converted from the emperor sort of down, and Christianity becomes the religion of state. It takes on some of the assumptions, the imperial assumptions, and some of the philosophical assumptions of that world into which the gospel was being preached. And that's what I mean by a synthesis culture. Now, what was one of the core marks of that mindset of the Greeks was basically, Matthew, the deification of reason. The essence of humanism, man as the measure of all things, in particular the philosopher as the measure of all things, because he has access to reason and to the inherent rationality of the universe, and so ideas of natural law and the neutrality of human reason. These were basic pre-commitments of the Greek mind, and it became the case that in the medieval world, and of course with the High Middle Ages, you kind of get the apogee of this appearing with Thomas Aquinas. The form matter ideas of Aristotle, for example,
yes,
who was more influential in Thomas Aquinas than Plato. Basically, that idea of nature as form and matter gets taken on by the Christian Church. Aquinas is commissioned by the Pope to interpret Aristotle for the Church. I mean, it's just an explicit request that there's a synthesis of Aristotle for Christian use. Part of the motivation there was good because they were trying to reach Muslims who were utilizing Aristotle for the advancement of Islam. And so you get basically a two-story world develops where you're trying to glue together these two worlds, the biblical view of reality, of the creator-creature distinction, of the absolute triune God of Scripture, who calls all things into being and orders them in terms of his word and purpose, as a world of grace that's somehow going to be cemented to or tagged onto this world of nature, which for the Greeks was not a created realm. These were eternal principles of form and matter, where the idea basically gives the eternal forms or ideas or archetypes give shape to a changing material reality. It's the whole problem of constancy and change, of unity and diversity that the Greeks were trying to solve. And so you end up in the medieval world with the church as a realm of grace that utilizes biblical revelation specifically for eternal salvation, but another realm, a non-transcendent realm of nature, where reason was Lord, and where man's access to ideas of natural law and man's reasoning capacity was more than sufficient for law and politics and education and the arts and all these sorts of things, even family, and where the state was within human society was basically the ultimate institution, as it was for Aristotle. The state is the organizing principle. It's the total society. Man is a political animal, And really, he's nothing without the state, and that's where natural law functions. And so the state becomes the highest institution in which to bring people to their earthly good. And then you have some perfecting grace to bring you to salvation through the church.
Yeah.
And then the welding of church and state with the papal theocracy. So that was really, the medieval world and the High Middle Ages prior to the Reformation.
Mm-hmm.
And the Reformation begins to push back against this view, but it doesn't affect a root and branch change in every area.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's part of the challenge, is that now, as people are looking for resources, they're looking back 500 years to the Reformation, but even back beyond past that, back to Thomas Aquinas. Mm-hmm. And to the Greek philosophers to say, look, this is what kind of built Western civilization, as it were. If we're going to get it back, we have to recover these things. And so it's logical that they would criticize the idea of religious worldview if reason is essentially a neutral tool that accesses a realm of nature that's accessible to human reason. Why do you need a biblical world and life view based in the Bible to deal with everything?
Yeah, because you don't need that. You don't need special revelation as the grounding of all true epistemology, right? Within that worldview. Well, man, it was too bad that you weren't able to join us for that discussion, because I know you wanted to be a part of that and to really trace with Dr. Boot how we've got to the moment where we do see this fractured Christian right between the dank right, as we've called them after Doug, and where we are coming from as a podcast. I feel like, Andrew, and maybe you can comment on this, we take a position that is neither popular with the conspiratorial dank right or popular with the more milquetoast Christianity, or popular with mainstream conservatism or liberalism. So we find ourselves in an unenviable spot of hopefully sanity in the midst of all the craziness. But that doesn't sell you as many clicks as we've seen recently from people like Candace Owen and Tucker Carlson, right? The views, the clicks, the eyeballs are with unhinged conspiratorialism and not with principled biblical conservatism.
Yeah, I've had this conversation with some of our guests where we find ourselves in a position where, because we are actually standing on what we believe to be true biblical conservatism, this is another way of saying biblical Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is we have, I'll say enemies just by shorthand, but we find ourselves receiving the scorn of the, what we label the political progressive left, because we're racists and homophobes and sexists and blah, blah, blah. So they hate our guts because we're Christo-fascists. But the problem is, to the political right of us, even though, again, these ideas, we need to maybe rethink the right-left paradigm. But further, in the more extreme version, would be people who also really strongly despise us, who say that we've imbibed a post-war consensus, we have boomer brain. A bunch of these people have, blocked me on social media, not because I've said anything mean against them, but because I just merely questioned some of the stuff they posted. So we actually find ourselves now receiving attacks from both sides. And this is what's unique to us. The left is only getting assaulted from the right, and the far right is only getting assaulted by the left. But here we are with clowns to the left of us and jokers to the right of us, and here we are in the middle, receiving the scorn of both of these groups. And if both of them had their way, we would probably end up in prison or deported. That would probably be their ideal end to us. So here we are with the unpopular but biblical position, and we're not really going to change it. We can't change it. We know the stakes are high. We know what needs to be done. So we're just this is who we are, and this is how it has to be.
And it's who we have always been, right, Andrew? Like, we haven't changed our tact basically since episode 1 together, when we filled in for Mike and Tim. And we do want to just take a trip down memory lane now and play for you the inaugural episode of Matt and Andrew together. Shout out to Mike Thiessen for it was his idea to put us together. Mike, I was working just doing the production and helping on that side of things, and he was like, yeah, man, you know as much about this stuff as any, Tim or I, like, you should jump in front of the camera. And I have this guy, Andrew DeBartolo. He's the man. He's from Kingston. You were at the time. And he's like, he knows his stuff. So you guys should do it together. I don't remember the occasion of why we had to fill in briefly, but it was the first episode we ever did together. So
we'll just do a brief pre-setup. So prior to this point, I hadn't been involved at all with the podcast stuff. I was doing work with LCC on a volunteer basis at this point. I was helping find the churches that stayed open and connecting them, and also helping to tell people where they could actually go to church.
Yes.
So once Bill C-4 passed, I took it upon myself to reach out to several pastors in the United States, and I actually got a letter sent to Pastor John MacArthur.
Yes.
And then he joined forces by really shining a light on what was happening. So the first time I ever appeared on the podcast was I told Mike, I basically said, I won't take no for an answer. But because we were able to secure an interview with Pastor John, I told Mike, not only am I going to be on that, but I'm going to actually speak to him, and that's just going to happen. And that's when we first met, because you were actually producing that episode as well. I remember, because the first time it looked good. It wasn't Zoom.
yeah. And that was the first time that I had ever produced for them. Like, I think that night before, I think is when I first talked to Mike on the phone. He's like, well, we just so happen to have a John MacArthur interview tomorrow. Would you want to come and do it? And that's where we met.
So that was the first time I was on. And then there were a few episodes where I filled in for Tim, or maybe you filled in for Mike. And so there's a few, but this was the first episode. Now, we didn't take over the show from here. This still was not the beginning of it, but this was the first time that you and I appeared together on the Dispatch, and we've come a long way, a lot grayer. I've definitely upgraded my AV setup since then.
The echo, man, the room echo.
I wasn't supposed to be a podcaster. I was just some guy that dropped a couple bucks at
I think you were using like your
Shoppers Drug Mart.
Yeah, I think you were using like your church audio setup.
No, I was at Shoppers Drug Mart, and it was after boxing. It was after Christmas, so they were blowing out all their Christmas stuff. I'm like, ooh, that microphone seems good. I don't know anything. I'm like, oh, it's really cheap, and I bought it. Sure enough, it was really cheap. Yeah, you get what you pay for.
And you can hear it. Let's play. Welcome, everybody, to Liberty Dispatch, broadcasting across enemy lines into the Canadian culture war. Perhaps you are wondering, who are these two handsome gentlemen before you today? And as we said off the top of the episode, my name is Matthew Halleck. Across the computer screen from me is Andrew DeBartolo. And
that old setup at your old place.
Yeah.
All it makes me think is that Wes Anderson directed all of your podcasting, because every Wes Anderson movie, if anyone not familiar, like he did the Fantastic Mr. Fox, and he also did the Darjeeling. Like all Wes Anderson movies have a certain visual, which is everything is hyper centered. And that rooftop peak, that's the Wes Anderson phase of Matt Halleck's podcasting.
Yeah, I know. It framed my head so perfectly. It was, and I'm sitting right in front of a doorway too. It was a good setup. We had to leave downtown Winnipeg because of obvious reasons, but no, it was a good setup. It was a great first studio. Are filling in for our brothers Michael Thiessen and Tim Tyso, as they are both away this week. So you are stuck with us, but it's good to talk with you again, Andrew.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's good to be here. Last time we chatted, it was a great discussion about what's happening at the trucker convoy, and so I look forward to talking about what's going on in our country today.
Whether you're watching our Rumble channel at Liberty Coalition Canada, or our YouTube channel at Liberty C Canada, or just listening via podcast, please subscribe wherever you get the show. And if you can, leave a 5-star review or a thumbs up, a like, whatever. It really helps us get the show out to more people. And finally, don't forget to subscribe to our contact list at libertycoalitioncanada.com, our website where you can check out all things Liberty Coalition. That way you will not be able to get censored, as YouTube is so wont to do especially, and you can stay up to date on all things LCC.
We were banned on YouTube twice.
But with housekeeping out of the way, Andrew, it's time to get into the meat and potatoes of the episode that we want to talk to people about today. And while war rages in the Ukraine,
this was the first
so
cold
much of the
lead
media
and cold open I ever wrote, by the way,
is glared and trained on what's happening overseas. We didn't want to get lost in the smoke and mirrors of this cycle of reflexivity, and we wanted to, remain laser focused on what's going on here at home. While tyrants abroad rattle their sabers, I don't want us to forget about the would-be dictators at home who continue to try and forward their progressive utopian pipe dreams. And for that reason, I wanted to take a look at some of the current legislation before the 44th Parliament in its first session right now. So, Andrew, of all the insane bills, of which there are many, I thought, which ones stood out to you? And maybe we can discuss some of that.
Well, the particular piece of legislation that I wanted to focus on, and actually you suggested it to me, and I thought, this looks good. This looks like something we need to highlight. And we need to highlight it because it's one of great importance. And as such, I believe it deserves to be handled
the ring light.
With the seriousness
you were
and
rocking the ring
that
light.
It deserves. And so what I want to do is I want to read the preamble and substance of the bill. This is Bill C-226. Preamble. Whereas our world is in peril, whereas Gaia, the spirit of the earth, can no longer stand the terrible destruction plaguing our planet, whereas she...
I think at this point, people were probably like, "What is happening?"
I was playing it straight. They were like, "What are we listening to?"
Yeah, it was a bold move by us to do such a thing. Tim and Mike are like, you guys have the key to the castle, and we just decided to go full satire. But let's not interrupt this beauty.
He sent 5 magic rings to 5 special young people, Kwame, Wheeler, Linka, Guy, and Mati. And whereas when the 5 powers combine, they summon Earth's greatest champion. Now therefore, Her Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the Senate and House of Commons of Canada, enacts as follows the National Planeteer Initiative. The minister must develop a national initiative to appoint planeteers who will recruit more planeteers themselves, because you can be one too, in order to save our planet, given that looting and polluting is not the way. Here's the content of the bill. The strategy must include A combining of the 5 elemental power rings, earth, fire, wind, water, and heart. B, the summoning of Captain Planet, because 1, he's our hero. 2, he will bring pollution down to 0. And 3, he will put asunder bad guys who like to loot and plunder. Well, hold on. That's not Bill C-226. No. That's a synopsis and the theme song of Captain Planet and the Planeteers. I was mistaken because both this 90s kids show and the actual bill are cartoons that are loosely based on fiction. Here's the real bill, which is just as obscene as what I've just read you.
And we haven't changed. It hasn't changed since. Oh man, that was good stuff. That is probably as fine as your writing has gotten. I
really think that was like my Led Zeppelin 1, and then nothing could just. Although there's one cold read that made Mike and Tim lose their minds, It was the Oakville teacher that had the huge prosthetic breasts.
Yeah.
And I start talking about stuff, and then I said, the theme of today's episode is boobs. Whether it's our elected officials or large plastic ones on the chest of an unwell man, we can certainly say that Canada is full of boobs. And Mike and Tim are losing it in the background. They just can't contain themselves.
Yeah.
That was a good one. That one I'm proud of.
Yes. You've done some great work on that end, and it's really started at the first, and I think that set the tone for about every episode that we did to follow, where we really did try to, and we really have tried to deal with serious topics from Canadian news and culture with a smile on our face. If you know us as human beings, we are jovial warriors. That is who we are. So we always wanted that to be an aspect. And mockery is key in tearing down the idols of our age and showing that the emperor has no clothes. And that's what we've always wanted to do. And that's one of the many ways that we've cut through the euphemisms, right? That we've cut through the nonsense that swirls around Canadian politics. And it's a very blunt and very straightforward way of doing that. But that is part of what we've tried to do. And obviously, you especially, Andrew, are very gifted at satire, and you're cutting in your humor. So we will miss that part of you, because I know I bring a very different flavor to the show than you do. But I'm thankful for obviously being allowed to be the straight man to your funky cold opens.
Your flavor is ginger, ground ginger.
Ground ginger, yeah.
Your flavor, some ground ginger, which is essential for holiday baking. Absolutely.
So, yes.
The second interview was a discussion that I was able to have with John Carpay from the JCCF regarding Bill C-9, which is recent, but even just the trajectory of what's happening with Canada. Actually, it was both of us. Sorry, there was another interview that you came in a little bit late, but John, it was both of us talking about what's happening in Canada, and this is pretty timely stuff. And we played a clip of John Carpay's podcast on our show. We're talking about Bill C-9. So here's a portion of the discussion that we had with John. Well, it's always good to have with us on Liberty Dispatch John Carpay. We've had the pleasure of interviewing him and having discussions with him in the past. John was born in the Netherlands. He grew up in BC. He earned his BA in political science at Laval University in Quebec City and his LLB from the University of Calgary. John served the Canadian Taxpayers Federation as Alberta Director from 2001 to 2005. As the founder and president of the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, John has devoted his legal career to defending constitutional freedoms through litigation and education. In 2010, John received the Pyramid Award for Ideas and Public Policy in recognition of his work in constitutional advocacy and his success in building up and managing a nonprofit organization to defend citizens' freedoms. John, I'm very grateful to have you on this very special 350th episode of Liberty Dispatch. We thought about who are some of the favorite people we could have and join us for a discussion, and you were on that list. So thank you for taking the time to join us today.
Well, thanks. It's an honor to be with you and with your viewers and listeners.
Well, John, tell us what's going on with Bill C-9, because this is a seriously worrisome piece of legislation that is seeking to amend the criminal code in Canada as it pertains to hate speech laws. And I think it has drastic ramifications for freedom of speech and religious liberty as it pertains to Canadians' rights and freedoms in Canada. So can you run us through quickly, give us an overview of what is Bill C-9 and what are some of those implications that we have to be aware of that are seriously at play with this bill if it is passed through the Bloc and Liberal coalition, like it's being suggested.
Yeah. So Bill C9 is called the Combating Hate Act, and if it's passed in its current form, it's going to move Canada a giant step closer to becoming like the United Kingdom, where they've got 12,000 people locked up in jail over what they've said on Twitter and social media. You've got 30 people arrested every day in the United Kingdom because they're critical of immigration policy, or they disagree with transgender ideology, or they've said something that's contrary to the narrative that the governments want everybody to believe. So Bill C9 is now before the House of Commons. People should contact their MPs, ASAP, today, tomorrow. What it does is it removes a current review process whereby prosecutions for hate speech in Canada need to be reviewed by the Justice Minister or the Attorney General of the province first. And so Bill C9 would get rid of that requirement, and it gives full discretion to local police, local prosecutors to launch way more hate speech prosecutions than ever before. So that's one big problem. Secondly, hate is an emotion. It's not clearly defined. The bill says that hate is stronger than disdain and dislike. So disdain and dislike are okay. Vilification and detestation are not okay. There's just not a clear parameters for the citizen to know for sure when they're transgressing the law or not. It also vastly increases penalties, so that if the judge feels that hate was a motivating factor in the commission of a crime, the maximum penalty can increase from 5 years to 10 years, or from 14 years to life in prison. Lastly, just in the past day or two, we've got a deal with the Liberals and the Bloc to get rid of a defense that has existed, whereby an opinion, if somebody expresses in good faith an opinion based on a religious text, then that's a defense to a hate speech prosecution. That protects pastors, priests, rabbis, imams, and religious leaders from being prosecuted over what their scriptures have to say about human sexuality. So those are the problems with C9, and people need to contact their MP.
That's a lot of problems.
So we want to, I guess, ground what's happening in history. And I think John, you and I have talked about this both on air and off the air. Matt and I have talked about this a lot, is the reality of when the outright in your face kind of tyranny and overt iron-fisted statism is present. That's when people will go to protests, they'll go to rallies, you'll have the trucker convoy. All of a sudden you will see this overt, we're standing up for our freedoms because it's on the line. And then all of a sudden, when the overt tyranny dissipates, or when the progressives stop their active march and merely hold their position, and they never back down, we back down, but they hold their position, and then we kind of back down and ease into comfort, we kind of grow lazy and forget that stuff is still happening under the surface. And then we don't freak out again until, it looks like they're coming for our freedoms again, when the whole time that's been the play. And so we're talking about this, that these amendments to the criminal code are not particularly new, that it was just a couple years ago after the attacks of October 7th, where an MP put forth Bill 367, which was essentially just removing these two exemption clauses from the criminal code with regard to hate speech. So other than that, where do you, or how would you frame, with your understanding of various pieces of legislation, not what's happening in the culture, but with pieces of legislation, what's happening in Parliament, what's kind of gotten us to this point? What would be some of the highlights that you would say, here are the various lines that if we connect it, it's almost as if there's a thread where more and more it's moving in this direction? What would those look like, just to help our audience understand that we didn't get here all of a sudden, that this is just another step in the long march through the institutions that Gramsci initiated, but it's been going on for like 200 years.
Well, the price of liberty is eternal vigilance, and so we can never rest on our laurels. Liberty is a gift that each generation has to learn and acquire and make it its own, so to speak. It's not like a piece of jewelry could go from generation to generation to generation, and you don't, other than making sure that nobody steals it, you don't really have to work at it. You just get the piece of jewelry. It stays what it is. With freedom, every generation has to really come to learn about it and appreciate it. And the biggest failing has been in our education system, where people are not taught history. And if somebody is ignorant of history, you can persuade that person of anything. And so the kids from kindergarten right on through to university are not taught, for example, that government can be a force for good. It can do certain things that private associations can't do. Government can be good for building some roads and bridges and running a court system. And, there's good that government can do. However, very few Canadians realize that in the 20th century, more citizens were murdered by their own government than the total number of soldiers dying in the battlefield. When you look at the death toll of the National Socialists in Europe, the Soviet Union under Stalin and other tyrants, China under Mao, Cambodia under Pol Pot, tens of millions of people murdered by their own government. And so this is a problem that needs to be addressed, is if you don't understand that government can be a force for evil as well as good, then you're not really alert to tyranny.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we literally just did a story recently on how MAID has become 1 out of 20 Canadians who die in Canada for all causes are through the euthanasia program that's set up, and that those causes of death don't even take into consideration of the hundreds of thousands of people who die with government sanction in abortion each year. And then when we're talking about experimental programs like IVF, all that sort of stuff, that government, the state sanctioned death of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Canadians is going on today. And that is a serious concern that you're highlighting for us as well. John, my concern is, I'm sure you saw the clip of Mark Miller in the what is the commission, in the discussions concerning Bill C-9, the ongoing discussions concerning it. And it seems to me that it's not only, defense of sincerely held good faith views based on a religious text is going to be done away with, but Miller actually pointed to specific instantiations, specific examples within the Bible of pieces of the Bible that he considers bad faith, that in and of themselves, Romans 1 and Leviticus 19, these sections of scripture are in themselves hate speech. What does that mean for Christians? Because it's not me just going on the street corners and preaching biblical sexuality that can get me thrown in jail. But Miller seems to be pointing to the actual text of scripture as being verboten.
Well, this is the big problem when you consider our current culture, our current climate, where one of the Justice Centre's cases, a school teacher in Ontario is threatened with the loss of her license because she publicly spoke out against transgender ideology and the harm that it inflicts on children. British Columbia nurse Amy Ham found guilty of professional misconduct for stating publicly on Twitter that there are only two sexes. I could go on and on and on. I could give you so many examples. So it's very naive to think that, so currently one of the defenses against if you are criminally charged with hate speech, if you were criminally charged for reading aloud a section of the, Leviticus, Romans, Muslim reading sections of the Quran that say that gay sex is sinful. If you got charged with hate speech, you could say, well, I'm expressing, in good faith, I'm expressing an opinion based on belief in a religious text. And so there's kind of a shield there. And I think it's necessary, where you've got this dominant woke ideology that basically says, all sex is fine as long as it's consensual, and it doesn't matter. It could be two men, could be two women, could be in marriage, outside of marriage. Nothing matters except for consent. That's the dominant doctrine. Why would anybody believe that they're not going to push that doctrine? If you get rid of this defense in the criminal code, you get a situation where pastor, priest, rabbi, a Muslim imam, etc., other religious leaders will face hate speech prosecutions over teaching that gay sex is sinful. And so this is an additional reason to oppose Bill C-9. It was already bad when introduced in September, but now it's been made worse.
So I don't want to be accused of being any more alarmist than I am. But when I look at the last several years, what it looks like to me is it looks almost like a setting up of the dominoes, or it looks like a positioning around the target in order to close in on the target. And what I mean by that is Bill C-4 now criminalizes the encouragement of people to embrace a biblical normative sexual practice. You have the Online Harms Act, which now has a lot to do with what can be said in an online context. You have this combating hate speech bill. It looks to me like various pieces of legislation have almost been setting up strategic points around the target, and I perceive that target is the bride of Christ, is the Christian church primarily. I'm doubtful that Muslims will be under the same persecution as Christians will when all of these pieces of legislation fall into place. But it looks like a strategic positioning around a target, and we're just setting up the pieces. So once all these pieces of legislation are in place, then we can begin the process of actually punishing people for holding and espousing these views. And we've closed off any possibility of them escaping punishment or being able to appeal to this particular piece of legislation or that particular protection. It just looks like they are setting us up to take us down. That's my perception from what I'm seeing. Does it look or feel or perceive that way legally in terms of what we're seeing happen in Parliament?
Oh, absolutely.
Inflation through the roof.
Food costs went up 10.6% in February.
Censorship of dissident voices, freezing of bank accounts.
Justin Trudeau invoking emergency powers against the truckers. Banks can now freeze their personal accounts, the accounts of anyone linked to the Freedom Convoy.
Digital surveillance and communism spreading.
What do we want?
Basic income!
With the basic income, and I felt a sense of security because I didn't have to worry about not going hungry, and I didn't have to worry about being kicked out of my apartment.
The government is on the verge of bankruptcy, and they're coming for your money.
Canada's federal debt increasing in real time, now surpassing $1.2 trillion. This debt is draining taxpayer dollars, with interest alone costing $54 billion this year.
It's time to break free and start saving in money they can't take from you. Since 2013, the folks at Bull Bitcoin have one mission: destroy central banking. Bull Bitcoin is the most trusted Bitcoin company in Canada. They empower you to buy, sell, and pay bills with Bitcoin. They are 100% non-custodial, which means that you always maintain full control over your Bitcoin, allowing you to reclaim your financial sovereignty and secure your wealth for the future. Their customer support will assist you throughout the whole process, helping you get your hands on the hardest money ever created. Escape their financial gulag. Click on the link below and start buying Bitcoin today. We also had a really great discussion with friend Pastor Alex Kloosterman at Hill City Baptist Church in Peterborough. We've had Alex on a bunch of times. It was actually thanks to Alex and Jeremy when we did our Dominion podcast, Liberty Dispatch mashup, that Alex just said, but the vaccines don't work. And that was enough for YouTube to kick us off.
Yeah.
He just made that one line in passing, but the vaccines don't even work. And YouTube was like, sorry, you're gone.
Yeah, it was so funny because we were so careful, and there was just like these like passing, fleeting moments where we would miss something, and then like they would get us immediately. One of the episodes that Mike did with Eric Metaxas also got us into trouble, and it was only literally right at the start where Eric is just very briefly criticizes the New York response to COVID. It's like literally a 20-minute or 20-second like clip. Both those times are the things that got us booted off YouTube. So yeah, man, it's amazing how that happened. But we can thank Alex for that. But we're actually more thankful for his friendship and this discussion.
We had a great discussion with him. We got to talk about nationalism. What do we do about Christian nationalism and really the way forward in Canada? So here's a portion of the discussion we had with Alex. Well, it is a real pleasure to have with us on this special 350th episode of Liberty Dispatch, friend of the show, Alex Kloosterman. Alex is the teaching pastor at Hill City Baptist Church in Peterborough, Ontario. He co-hosts the Dominion podcast, and thanks to him and his co-host Jeremy, we were banned from YouTube the second time because he mentioned the jabs. He's also the co-owner of Resistance Coffee Company. I have the shirt. He has the shirt. Get you some coffee, become an outpost. We'll talk about that in a bit. You can also read their posts and listen to their podcast at dominionpress.com. He and his wife, Rebecca, have been married since 2010. They have two lovely young girls. Alex, thanks so much for joining us, brother. It's great to have you.
Thanks for having me, boys. And I don't think I knew that we were the reason you got flagged or banned there. Sorry about that.
Yep. It's okay, but this is a while ago now. We've since we tried again for a third time, but it was when we did the smash up, the we did the episode, the 2 for 1, and then they say, that fiery ginger said vaccine, they're done.
Yeah, I still think we get throttled like unbelievably on all our socials because they just they shadow ban you. That's just what they do when you tell the truth. But that's what we're all about. So I'm looking forward to doing that with you, Alex. Good to see you again, brother.
Yeah, and hey, congrats on 350. That's awesome. You guys have you've interviewed a ton of people, and you know what you've been able to do and who you've been able to talk to, and the conversations you've been able to have in a relatively short period of time has been phenomenal. So I know that a lot of us appreciate what you've done, and obviously both of you personally as brothers and friends. So thanks for having me.
Awesome.
So let's jump right in. I want to, I guess, continue or have the discussion that I know you and I, Alex, have been having personally, and a number of men have been having, and I want to bring that discussion before our audience and talk through some ideas and get us thinking correctly about social and cultural issues. And so I guess I want to start off by saying or asking, how do we deal with the Christian nationalist label? I mean, there's some who say that we can, if we define it a certain way and claim it for our own, that we can redeem and use that title, that label, again, according to our definition. Some might say we just need to abandon it altogether because of the baggage, and maybe there's a little bit of a spectrum between the two. So what do you think? What should we do with the label Christian nationalist as we seek to indeed see the kingdom of God be pressed out and expand in our country? What do we do about it? How do we respond to it?
Yeah, I think there's two layers of analysis here. There's the principle or, philosophical, theological analysis. When you consider a label or a term, do these words accurately capture a set of principles that are good and true and helpful? And the second layer of analysis has to do with strategy. So you can answer in the affirmative to the first question, and still think that perhaps it's not helpful for a variety of reasons. The co-opting of the term by people who don't affirm those principles, et cetera, et cetera. So I think maybe we could start with the first category. Does Christian nationalism, does that term, is it possible for those words to capture a Christian or a biblical view of nations? And I would say, theoretically, yes. Christians affirm the God-ordained reality of nations, that nations are a covenantal reality. They are an objective reality, having objective duties or responsibilities to God, and corresponding authority that goes with those responsibilities. So, if we're thinking in reference to the last, however many decades, and in Canada, certainly the last 15 years, living in the context of a post-national state, as our former prime minister referred to it, and in an ideological environment that has attempted to undermine and degrade the idea and reality of a nation, a healthy nation, at every level. We want to reassert that a nation is good. A nation is a God-ordained unit, and we think that it should be oriented towards God. And we can discuss what a nation should be, but we want to affirm that reality in opposition to kind of a post-national globalist utopian sentiment, right? And so I remember, maybe 3 or 4 years ago when we first started talking about this all together, you guys were part of that conversation. We were talking about Christian nationalism in opposition to, or as the alternative to, pagan globalism, right?
Yeah.
Or pagan totalitarianism or pagan authoritarianism. That's what we were referring to. So, yes, the idea that a nation is, Christian nationalism could be a term to use in principle, sure. The reason why I don't think that it is actually a helpful term anymore is that as a label, it has been co-opted by people who are not Christian, and it has been filled with substance that is antithetical to Christianity on such a scale that I don't know if it's helpful. If your goal is, why do you have a shorthand anyways? To summarize your position. So if you want to have a shorthand that everyone thinks means something else, then it doesn't serve its purpose. And so, you know what I mean? So it's like, okay, we can easily affirm in conversation and in writing in a podcast the necessity of nations. But whether or not we use that as a shorthand term. So there's a couple things that come to mind for me personally have been crystallizing. The conversation is not so much anymore that I've observed in reference to globalism, although that's still an enormous threat. The distinctions that have to be made now are more in reference to pagan nationalism. So the reason that nationalism itself is not a sufficient definition is at least twofold. One, you can have an Indian nationalism. You can have a Hindu nationalism. You can have a Muslim form of nationalism. So it's like, okay, that we affirm the reality of a nation state is not sufficient, because what a Hindu thinks what a nation is, what an Islamic culture thinks what a nation is, what those cultures think what a citizen is, what they think a human is, what they think the law is, what they think all of the things that Christians understand about a nation are could be completely different, and not just different, actually antithetical. And so it's almost superfluous to say you're a nationalist. It's like, okay, you're not a globalist, but that doesn't go far enough. It's like, just to say it's like saying you're anti-trans. It's like, okay, that's good. 2 + 2 is 4, and you affirm that. But what is a man? But what is a woman? But what is marriage? But what is children? Like it doesn't go far enough. The other problem I see is that nationalism, if that's the word that we choose, historically, and I think in contemporary usage, refers almost exclusively to the relationship between the state and the people. And so while we would say that the state is a God-ordained institution, Romans 13, that God has instituted for our good, and a strong, righteous state is a good thing for the flourishing of citizens, we would affirm that. It is not the totality of a healthy, functioning society. And what I've come to realize is that where a lot of this conversation goes off, even if you think of Wolf's work and stuff, is that there tends to be too much emphasis on the role of the state and society at the expense of the other institutions that God has ordained. So the family, the individual. I mean, in nationalist circles, there's huge rhetoric against, liberalism, even classic liberalism. And it's like, okay, you can certainly understand how certain errors arose out of a classical liberal ideology, and you can critique that from a biblical perspective. But the reality and the inherent worth of the individual is a biblical reality. And the freedoms that are afforded and the responsibilities that are afforded individuals by virtue of being created in the image of God are something that must be maintained. And I've noticed in a lot of nationalist circles that it's the collectivist mentality that actually undermines or at least overlooks the critical nature of the individual, the family unit, the church as an institution, and muddles these things. So this is a long-winded way of me saying, if I'm trying to articulate a biblical vision for a flourishing society, I am not going to be content with merely discussing the role of the state. That is one, and I don't even think it's the most fundamental unit in society. I actually think that the family unit is. I'm not going to make the thing that I basically reduce all of my thinking to be the state. So, and then there's obviously the historical baggage of the most famous nationalists in the history of the world were the National Socialists. And I put up last week, can the Dominion Society just very simply differentiate their view of nationalism from, the Third Reich, just for clarity's sake, like just avoid unnecessary, controversy and just clearly delineate yourself. It's actually not hard. It's not hard to explain how you would differ, and no one can.
Yeah.
And I would say no one will. And so to me, a lot of these ideologies in Canada that go under the guise of nationalism are just pagan ethno-nationalists. And the hypocrisy of it is that they bear no resemblance to historic Canadian nationalism. So I'm a nationalist in the sense of historic Canadian Christian and a nationalist. I believe in a strong nation and define that in biblical terms. But to gaslight Canada into thinking that, historic Canadians were sympathetic to the Third Reich and their brand of ethno-nationalism, it's shameful beyond words. And just the fact that people think such things just exposes the illiteracy and the naivety of the fool's parade, right? So
yeah,
I don't think that Christian nationalism has almost any use whatsoever.
So we're at the halfway point of our episode, roughly the halfway point. And so because this is an episode filled with interviews with guests, minus the 7 interviews featured in this episode, I thought it'd be good for us to rap a little bit about some of the favorite guests we've had on Liberty Dispatch. And we've had so many different guests covering so many different
Dude, don't
things.
make me do it. Yeah, I hate doing the favorites.
I have mine, so I can go first.
You go first while I collect my thoughts, because I'm the worst at favorites lists. I'm terrible.
It was what made this my favorite interview or favorite guest, with a lot of the circumstances surrounding it. So let's go all the way back to 2021. So this is the end. This is November 2021. This is the Church of War conference in Waterloo, Ontario.
Mm-hmm.
And up until this, so by the time we reached this point, both James Coates and Tim Stevens had both spent time in prison. Tim Stevens was twice that he was in prison, and James Coates spent a total of 37 days in prison. Now, they had obviously done a series of interviews and podcasts and appearances, but they'd never actually done one together in person, mostly because, they live 4 hours away. So knowing they were going to be there and we were going to be there, I reached out to both of them and I said, can we find a time where all 3 of us can sit down together around a table and I can interview the 2 of you at the Church at War conference? And because they were both speaking and things were going to be, wild and busy, we decided before the conference began, we would get there early while everyone was still setting up. Matt, you were behind the camera. And then I was able to sit down at a table with the 2 of them. And so essentially, this was the first time the 2 of them did an interview in person. And it was the first time I had met either of them in person at the Church at War conference. And so we sat down and we talked about lessons from COVID, what their churches went through, kind of some of my favorite things and encouraging things to share with them. And it was for all those reasons, it wasn't just a discussion with James and with Tim, but for all those reasons wrapped together at the conference, first time meeting them, interview with the 2 of them together, first time they did an interview together, all the emotions and anticipation being very high that weekend at the conference. I think that was, for all those reasons, I think that was my favorite interview and my favorite guests that I've had in the history of the show. So that would be mine. And I think that's not to slight any other guests, but for all those reasons, that's the easy pick for me.
Yeah, that was a good one. I didn't get to be on that. I was on the 1s and 2s, but it was very special, obviously, to bring people that first in-person interview with both Tim and James. And, things were still so raw and real at that moment that it was, it felt very consequential. So I think
it was still technically illegal. So what most people don't recognize is that at that time in Waterloo, we were still technically breaking the laws because we had like 800 people and no one had a mask on, and we're all like singing and eating together. So we were kind of breaking the law a little bit still. It was a wild time.
Yeah, and that was an amazing time, because that was also the time that you and I first actually got to meet each other in person.
Right.
It was over that kind of weekend where I was able to come to you. You picked me up from the airport. We went to your old stomping grounds, randomly ran into a listener of the show during our first meeting, which was pretty amazing.
We ran the risk of dying on the way home to Kingston because it was the worst snowstorm of the year. And it was so bad. So people decided to stay home. I don't know if you remember, but on the way back, there was basically the 401 going the other way was shut down for like 10 kilometers. There were cars that were stuck there for hours because ambulance and fire trucks couldn't get in there. And we're just driving like,
listening to Toronto. Music.
We'll be fine. My wife's in the car with us, like, we'll be fine.
Yeah.
And it turns out that like all of London shut down
Yeah.
And it was just it was quite the weekend.
It was definitely a wild time. And I guess, yeah. So who was my favorite guest? I think we've had, I pinch myself when I look back. I mean, we could even just look at this episode and the lineup that we have in this episode. I think it's just a snapshot of the amazing variety of human beings we've been able to have on this show that have been integral in our thinking in various spheres. But this I warned you, I'm terrible at favorites lists, and I'm probably breaking the rules because it's favorite guests on the show. But I'm going off script on this, Andrew, and I think my favorite part of the show, the favorite person that I've had on the show throughout all these years is you, buddy.
No, Matt.
I know it's lame because it was supposed to be the guest, but I have been reflecting on this, and I feel blessed that we've been able to do this together for so long, and that this random pair that Mike decided to put together, that it worked out, and that we had an instant friendship even before we met each other, but then getting to spend some time with you and your family, it just cemented things. And yeah, it's just been a wonderful ride. And going through the craziness of Canadian politics and culture over these last many years has been sobering, and it's we've got to process a lot of difficult things together, and to as iron sharpens iron, think through these things, build each other up. In that way, I'm very, very thankful for all of that. And I couldn't have had these experiences, we couldn't have done these interviews, we couldn't have had all these guests if you weren't alongside me doing this. So I think it's been a great partnership, and it's something that I valued deeply. And I think both of us, looking back on the podcast in a lot of years, we're going to look back and say, geez, this is crazy. We interviewed Dr. McCullough, Dr. Malone. We had scheduling issues with Dr. Malone this episode because he's off going to the White House. We've become friends with some of the men who have so deeply impacted our thinking. You think of Doug, you think of Joe.
We were scheduled to talk with Dr. Malone a week before we actually interviewed him, and we get an email saying, "Hey, we're so sorry, but he's been summoned to the White House."
Exactly.
I guess that's a good enough reason to miss our podcast.
Donald Trump or Matt Halleck. I don't know. Andrew. I don't know, but yeah.
No, I was shocked you said yes to that first interview. By the way, when we interviewed him the first time a couple of years ago, I was actually shocked that he said yes, and he came on, and then we had quite the discussion. I was watching over that recently. That's amazing that he said yes.
Yeah, and even as we did the interview with him this time, you can tell we're in lockstep on so many things, and he appreciates what we're trying to do up here, and we appreciate obviously all that he's done for the truth, especially over the craziness of the last almost approaching 6 years, right? So it's been a wild time. It's been a lot of episodes. I mean, I love any chance that we have to speak to a knowledgeable guest to unpack news, culture, theology, philosophy, all this stuff. I've always lived for having wonderful conversations. I value so much talking and thinking through things together with other people. So that's a major highlight for me on the show. I think you point out an interview that was amazing. Even the after kind of conference interview where we were able to sit together. I think it was you, Mike, Jacob, and myself, and we just kind of sat there and talked about the conference. That was a pretty amazing experience as well. So there were so many wonderful guests. I love them all, but again, it's been a pleasure that surpasses all the guests that we've had on to do this show with you, brother. And I wish you Godspeed and everything that you're getting up to in the future. But speaking of Dr. Malone, let us get into the conversation that we had with Dr. Malone. It's fascinating. I'm sure you'll like it.
Well, friends, it is a real treat to have with us for our 350th episode of The Dispatch, Dr. Robert Malone. Dr. Malone is an internationally recognized scientist and physician and the original inventor of the mRNA as a technology, DNA injections, and multiple non-viral DNA and RNA, mRNA platform delivery technologies. But again, you know this if you watch the show because we reference his work and his words often. He holds numerous fundamental domestic and foreign patents in the fields of gene delivery, delivery formulations, and vaccines, including for fundamental DNA and RNA, mRNA technologies. He's been an invited speaker around 100 conferences. He's chaired or been the keynote speaker at numerous conferences, and he has sat on or served as chairperson on HHS and DoD committees. He received his medical degree from the Northwestern Feinberg School of Medicine. He completed the Harvard Medical School Fellowship as a Global Clinical Research Scholar in 2016 and was scientifically trained at the University of California at Davis, the University of California at San Diego, and the Salk Institute Molecular Biology and Virology Laboratories. He served as an assistant and associate professor of pathology and surgery at the University of California at Davis, the University of Maryland, and the Armed Forces University of the Health Sciences. And if we could add an additional jewel upon his crown, this is the second time he has been on the Liberty Dispatch, which might be one of the most prestigious of all his accomplishments, and probably our accomplishment because he actually came back. So,
yes,
Dr. Malone, it is a treat and a privilege to have you on the Dispatch. I've been very excited about this for months now. So thanks for joining us.
And thanks for having me. Just to add another little chink in the armor is recently I got appointed adjunct full professor at Louisiana State University.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Who are we to be talking to such a prestigious man, Andrew?
I didn't include that. Now I feel terrible.
Yeah.
Well, it just happened a few weeks ago, so no harm, no foul.
Okay, not so bad. So, Dr. Malone, I wanted to start off by talking about the ACIP, and we've also had a discussion with Dr. McCullough about a little bit of a presentation he did there and some of the research that he presented regarding vaccines and the connection to autism, and also how there's no reason for kids to be getting measles vaccines the day they're born. So why don't you tell our audience a little bit about what is the ACIP, and recently your, I guess, presentation, contribution, kind of, or takeaways from it, and what do you think is most important for our audience to be knowing?
Our job is only to provide independent advice to the director. So let's get into the details of what was actually authorized, because the press has really distorted this, and even leading politicians in the United States have misinterpreted what was done here and really missed some of the nuance. So first off, Secretary Kennedy had made a pledge that he would not take anyone's vaccine away from them in the United States during his term of service as Secretary of HHS. And so it was important that we preserve the ability of patients who want to provide a birth dose or any other dose of hepatitis B vaccine to their children, to preserve their ability to do so, and to preserve the policies of the U.S. government in subsidizing those vaccines for those people. To do that took a fair amount of heavy lifting in terms of crafting the language. So the language is quite nuanced. As a starting point, there's no change in the vaccine recommendation for infants born to women who test hepatitis B surface antigen positive or have an unknown hepatitis B surface antigen status. Existing recommendations remain the same. So we didn't stop the birth dose. we absolutely, through not modifying, continued current policies for mothers who are infected with hepatitis B. That's what all that fancy language is stating, is moms who have hepatitis B have a very high risk of transmitting hepatitis B during the birth process or thereabouts to their children. And when children get infected with hepatitis B virus, they go on typically to develop lifelong hepatitis B infections and eventually are at risk for significant liver damage, including cancer of the liver. That there's no reason to administer a less than perfectly safe vaccine product to every newborn that's extremely low risk, that's being born of a mother who's not hepatitis B positive. That logic is really twisted. It's very difficult to defend, and the rest of the Western world, for the most part, does not do that. So what was done was 2 votes. Again, as I said, the birth dose for hepatitis B positive mothers, which is very rare in the United States now, is still recommended to the child. The birth dose of vaccine, as well as the administration of hepatitis B immunoglobulin, which does a great job of keeping baby from getting hepatitis B if mom is infected. So yay, we kept that in place. Vote 1. For infants born to hepatitis B surface antigen negative women, that's to say women that aren't infected, ACIP recommends individual-based decision-making. Oh my God. That is the press
Sacrilege.
Just blowing up. What that's a fancy way of saying, and that may get, instead of individual-based decision-making, the White House may want to use some other words there, but basically ACIP endorsed the idea that women have the right, and parents have the right, and guardians have the right to determine when hepatitis B vaccine is administered to their children. This is apparently heresy, if you would listen to the various medical guilds. And it's good. Literally, they were saying that we're going to cause thousands and thousands of children to develop hepatitis B. Now, there's absolutely no data suggesting that. It was just all propaganda and hyperbole. Going on to individual-based decision-making in consultation with a healthcare provider. Okay, so you should talk to your doctor. That's what that means. And make a decision, but the parents get to decide. For parents deciding when, and here's the kicker, when or if to give the hepatitis B vaccine, including the birth dose. In other words, we haven't taken away the right to administer the birth dose if Karen believes that it's necessary for her child. But if it's not Karen, you understand the implication there, then it's not required. It's not recommended. And we basically said after that, and so the nuance of the wording there is we're not saying you should necessarily ever give your child hepatitis B birth dose. Now, or any dose. It opens up the door to parents making a decision whether or not they want to ever give their child hepatitis B vaccine. Now, a case can be made that it would be prudent for your child to take it before they become sexually active or are likely to be placed in let's say, an urban environment where they might be tempted to engage in IV drug abuse. But for children, and especially newborns, as one wag put it, most newborns are not engaging in premarital sex or IV drug abuse. So there it is.
Yeah. I mean, there are some pretty rough parts of the United States, but I guess by and large, yeah, that's probably not happening.
Yeah, I think probably we're safe on that one. Yeah. Parents and healthcare providers should consider vaccine benefits, vaccine risks, and infection risks. Boy, that's a big statement. For those not receiving the hepatitis B birth dose, it is suggested that the initial dose is administered no earlier than 2 months of age. We're not saying you should administer the first dose at 2 months of age. We're saying, hey, if you decide you want to give baby an early dose, we're recommending that you, we're not even recommending, we're suggesting. It's even softer. We thought about using the term recommending. We're suggesting that you delay the initial dose until after 2 months when baby's brain and liver and kidneys are better developed. Kind of makes sense. So that's dose one, vote one. And you would think the sky was going to fall tomorrow and hepatitis B would sweep the nation from the press reporting on this. What they missed is vote two is a lot more disruptive and insidious. But they were so distracted by their umbrage over vote one that they seem to kind of have missed the vote two significance. Vote two, when evaluating the need for a subsequent hepatitis B vaccine dose in children, so this is after dose one, you've had, your young child has had dose one. Now, does the young child need dose two? Does the young child need dose three? The reason for a 3-dose schedule is because on average, about 30% of children fully seroconvert after one dose. And then something like 60% seroconvert. This is a defined standard in terms of the immune response, the titer, antibody titer that's produced. So about 60 or 70, maybe 2/3 of them convert after the second dose. And the reason the third dose is recommended is to get them to 95% seroconversion. That means 5% of all children that receive all 3 doses still don't seroconvert. There's no indication that they're going to be protected, just to say. So what happens if your child seroconverts after dose 1? How do you ever know? Well, we have an answer. We're now voted, when evaluating the need for a subsequent vaccine dose in children, parents should consult with healthcare providers to determine if a post-vaccination anti-hepatitis B serology testing should be offered. This is radical in terms of vaccine strategy. Serology results should determine whether the established protective titer threshold has been achieved. The cost of this testing should be covered by insurance. So we're saying no longer should we use a one-size-fits-all, every kid gets 3 jabbed because of the 30% that don't seroconvert after jab 2 or the 60% that don't seroconvert after jab 1. If your child has seroconverted after jab 1, we're suggesting you think hard about not going forward with jab 2 or jab 3. But in order to make that decision in consultation with your physician, you need to get the data. So how are you going to get the data? Well, these aren't cheap, these serology testing. And so we're saying, well, the government and the insurance companies are going to have to cough up for that cost. Your mom is not going to have to pay for it. So there is the big bombshell decisions. And the thing about this second vote is it opens the door to a whole new approach to vaccination, which is instead of one size fits all, let's allow, number one, parents the right to make decisions about whether or not they are going to accept vaccine products for their children. And if so, let's not continue to use a one size fits all if baby William seroconverts for whatever after dose 1. Why should William have the risk of dose 2 and dose 3? Maybe those risks are very small, but they're not zero. And that is the pretty much the summary of what happened at ACIP. As I said, you would think the world had come to the end, and we are all on the ACIP evil people.
Remember when Canada was a land of boundless promise, where families built thriving communities on faith, freedom, and hard work? A time when you leave your doors unlocked, neighbors were friends, and we sang our anthem with pride. Canada was respected worldwide, a rugged land full of resolute and virtuous people. We were builders forging farms from the untamed wilderness, raising strong families and forging our destiny. But now a shadow has fallen over our great nation. Creeping tyranny, the erosion of God-given rights, and cultural division have dimmed that bright promise. We yearn to reclaim what made us a true north, strong and free. We saw Canada's spirit cracking and wanted to do something. With Resistance Coffee Company, we saw an opportunity to build something bigger. Our nation was forged in the fires of adversity, and we saw an opportunity to help lay a foundation for a bright future, rebuild through that same commitment to hard work, courage, and the principles that made our nation great. Our mission is not just about crafting excellent coffee. It's about fueling everyday Canadians to stand resolute against the tide and rebuild the Canada we love. Our goal is to inspire a movement that rebuilds Canada on the bedrock of faith, freedom, and responsibility. Each sip strengthens the resolve to reclaim our nation's proud legacy. We stand for freedom, hard work, human dignity, the rule of law, personal responsibility, the traditional family, the supremacy of God, and a resolute hope for our future.
These aren't fringe values. These are the core truths that build Canada.
We source specialty grade premium beans and precision roast them fresh for every batch to ensure delicious flavor in every cup. From vibrant light roasts to bold dark blends, each cup is meticulously and carefully crafted, delivering unmatched quality. As a family-run Canadian company, we serve thousands with coffee and content as bold as our mission.
So I was completely shocked when Dr. Peter McCullough said he would come on our podcast for the first time. So, I mean, I kind of have to set this up that
he did get, to be fair, he was on the Dispatch before we were on the Dispatch. One of Mike's biggest interviews was with Dr. McCullough.
He came on with us.
Yeah, that's true.
So,
yeah.
So Dr. McCullough was one of those, and I've told him this in person both times you interviewed him, and even in other correspondence, but he was an early voice of reason. And I was clinging to these voices of reason essentially so that I didn't feel I was crazy for the stuff I was thinking, because I was, really, really early on, like all the way back in March and April of 2020, I'm looking at data from Italy and China and Iran. I'm looking at actual hospital data in Ontario. I'm trying to understand numbers. And what I'm seeing is it's not nearly as bad as what they're saying it is. And I was saying all the way back in April and May of 2020 that the devastating consequences of what they were proposing with the lockdowns is going to be critical. It was going to be just devastating. And then once they start talking about this jab, and I'm hearing people talk about mRNA and autoimmune disorders, I didn't like it at all. And so, but everywhere you go, you hear the opposing view. You hear the safe and effective, lockdowns work, blah, blah, blah. So Dr. Malone was one of those voices. Sorry, Dr. McCullough was one of those voices early on that cut through the noise and was a voice of reason in an otherwise crazy time. So guys like him, or guys like Dr. Stephen Petty, who Mike got to interview, just helping us really understand the masks and hazards and viruses and infection.
Yeah.
And so when he agreed to be on our show, I thought this is so great, because he's been an important figure in helping me make sense of what's going on regarding the pandemic. So I knew, and we got him to respond to Dr. Neely Kaplan Murphy.
It was
react
quite a
to
fun
Dr. Mass
episode.
Formation Psychosis.
Yeah, it was quite a fun episode. I think he enjoyed doing it.
Yeah,
I
knew he had to
doing
come
it.
on again.
Yeah.
He was the second person on my list that we got to reach out to him, mostly to make sure he's available, because he is exceedingly busy.
Yes.
So we had a great discussion with Dr. McCullough, and we haven't talked about this, but I was chatting with Catherine about the substance of our discussion.
Mm-hmm.
And her recommendation was, of all the interviews, in order to get maximum audience and outreach, she said out of the 7, this is the one that she says you may want to put this one out free for everyone, in part because the content of the discussion about the studies he's finding that connect vaccines, child vaccines to autism, and the research that they found where they essentially their influence is why the American government has pulled away the hepatitis B vaccine as mandatory on the first day of someone's life.
Mm-hmm.
So given what he has to talk about, she thought you should make that one free because everyone needs to hear about this.
Yeah.
But that's not my decision to make. But and all that to say, it is a very, very good. He started off by saying, "I look forward to dropping some truth bombs." He said that unprompted.
You knew you were in for it. And I unfortunately was, en route to San Francisco, so I wasn't able to join you guys for the discussion. But I'm glad that you guys were able to record such a fascinating interview. And here is a snippet of that interview. If you want to get the full thing, you have to get over to ldcanada.substack.com. So definitely do that.
Well, friends, it truly is quite the treat and the privilege and the honor to have with me on this very special 350th episode of Liberty Dispatch. Former guest, friend of the show, Dr. Peter McCullough. Dr. McCullough is an internist, cardiologist, and epidemiologist, and he's been managing the cardiovascular complications of both viral infections and the injuries developed after the COVID-19 injections. He has dozens of peer-reviewed publications on the infection and has commented extensively on the medical response to the COVID-19 crisis in The Hill, America Out Loud, and on Fox News. Dr. McCullough has testified in the U.S. Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs, the Texas Senate Committee on Health and Human Services, the Colorado General Assembly, the New Hampshire Senate, the Pennsylvania Senate, and South Carolina Senate concerning many aspects of the pandemic response. Dr. McCullough co-moderated and testified in the U.S. Senate panel COVID-19, A Second Opinion, chaired by Senator Ron Johnson. Dr. McCullough has reviewed thousands of reports, participated in scientific congresses, group discussions, press releases, and has been considered among the world's experts on COVID-19. That's certainly how we have presented him, and I think accurately so on our show. He has many times been a voice crying out in the wilderness concerning COVID madness and continues to be, in my opinion. And I have been personally grateful for his work over these last number of years. Dr. McCullough, it really is a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me on. So this is our 350th episode. This is also my last episode with the Dispatch as I'm moving on to other things. So it is truly a pleasure that you would take some time and discuss with me what you're doing and what's going on. So thank you so much.
Well, it's an honor to be on your 350th show. That's a lot of truth bombs. And we're going to drop some more today. So let's get going.
Our most viewed show in the history of our show, which has been going on for almost 4 years, is the interview that Matt and I had with you where we were responding to Dr. Neely Kaplan-Murth. She's a doctor in Ottawa that still to this day continues to wear an N95 and has self-admitted to receiving her 10th booster. And quite recently, Matt and I covered she had to have a hysterectomy because of ovarian cancer that developed postmenopausal. So that is our most viewed episode with you. And I think for good reason. You've been, for many, many people in the last several years, many times a lone voice of reason, cutting through the noise and bringing a measured and thoroughly scientific, statistical, analytical response. And I've appreciated that about you. And I mean, Matt and I on the last couple of years have continued to cover studies with your names on them as you are a part of these peer-reviewed studies examining the effects of the jabs, the ongoing effects of some of this madness. So I want to talk, and we were talking off air about the ACIP meeting that's going on and some of the, like you said, some of the real truth bombs that we need to delve into. Before we get into some of that, and I want to, maybe you can update us and say, like we've said, even though the real COVID era pandemic is behind us, the long-reaching effects of what we did, our policies and the jab, we might be sorting through this for years and years and years to come. So in the last couple of years, what have been some of the real important studies or findings that you have found regarding the COVID policy, specifically the jabs, that we want to draw attention to our audience to say, we are certainly not out of the woods, and we need to be hyper vigilant so we don't repeat what we did in 2020.
Well, that's a loaded question. And let's just take the aspects of the pandemic before the vaccine. So what we now understand is that the number of deaths in every country was grossly overstated. So test positive, death at any time with no adjudication. National Center for Health Statistics in the United States showed at least half of our deaths, there was no pneumonia on the chart. So it was just potentially just a false positive or test or just an unrelated issue. When adjudication is applied, my estimate is about 10% of the U.S. deaths. The Italians think it's only 3% of the deaths are truly due to COVID. So United States, we're looking at a 1.2 million top line case fatalities. We're looking at 120,000 Americans dying of COVID. Now, that's a big number, but a bad flu season could be 70,000. So that would be the first point. The second point is that of those who died, it's been my testimony that they died because they didn't receive proper early multi-drug treatment like the McCullough protocol, which is the most widely used multi-drug protocol in the world. It's been credited with saving tens of millions of lives, sparing hundreds of millions of hospitalizations. McCullough protocol, published in the American Journal of Medicine and in Reviews in Cardiovascular Medicine. It was the protocol adopted by the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons. So we had this from the very beginning if the government wouldn't have gotten out of the way. But the problem is governments all over the world stepped in and they blocked early treatment. People died. We know that from the lockdowns, social distancing, all the harm that was done there. In the United States, 60% of the businesses never came back. The kids lost a year or more of school. There are all kinds of sociological studies indicating that this is going to have a long-term set of repercussions. And then we move into the vaccines. This has been an absolute tragedy. In the United States, 81% of Americans took at least one shot. And in Canada,
it's
I think the numbers are far higher.
5 to 97% took the first shot, and the second shot was still fairly high. It was just under 90%, very high percentages.
There you go, much higher. United States, second shot was 70%. One booster was at 15%. Currently, United States, a normal person like you and I, we'd be on booster number 7. CDC's not reporting this anymore, but I think it's way less than 1%. Immunocompromised would be at shot number 10. This is unprecedented to give the synthetic genetic code, which is Pfizer and Moderna, coding for a lethal protein developed in a biosecurity lab in Wuhan, China. That's what the vaccines are. This is a horrendous thought that people took this into their body. There's no way of breaking down the messenger RNA and getting rid of it. The spike protein doesn't have any human enzymatic route of clearance. We've made some progress there in our research. But this is astonishing as we sit here today. So as I testified in the U.S. Congress about a year and a half ago, I told my congressional panel that I estimate there's 5 to 15 years of consequences from when people took the last shot. So, most people, if they took them in 2021. Some took them later. Unfortunately, the doctor you presented, she took 10. That means she took them right out into this year, and now she's suffering one of the complications, what's aptly termed turbo cancer.
Yeah, and that's it's astonishing to me that we still see and will continue to see. We were just looking at a study, Matt and I were covering a study a few episodes ago, clearly showing the delayed development of children in terms of their ability to read and speaking, that they're well behind. You mentioned the businesses. I mean, what was done in the world and to our countries was astonishing. And we're going to be sorting through, because the consequences of having your business taken from you, right? You worked 30 years to save up to start a business. That was taken from you. Your life savings is gone. Your business is gone. This plunges you into substance abuse and deep depression, which then in turn affects the way that you are with your wife and your kids. And so this is a this is a multi-generational problem that will take years and years, long after you and I are gone. We're still going to be sorting through the long-reaching effects of these, and it is very sad. So, in your estimation, as someone who very early on was seeing what was going on and seeing, like you said, that there are responses that are measured and reasonable that we're not taking. So we see this early on. We understand some of the plays that were made. In your estimation, what would you offer to people as a way of encouraging them to say, lest we fall victim to something like this again in the near future, whether it's another pandemic or whether it's, at least in Canada, our federal government has referred to climate change as the greatest public health crisis of human history. It's an existential threat. So whether it's climate change or another pandemic or whatever the case may be, what would you tell people? What do they need to be aware of and looking out for at this point so that they don't get duped again? Because many, I think, well-meaning people gave into fear and pressure and ignorance, and then they did something that they regret, and now they have to deal with the consequences. How can we, on the front end, tell people you have to be watching for these things so you don't fall victim again to whatever's next coming out of the pipe?
Yeah, I think Elon Musk was, he hit the nail on the head when he said what's spreading around is a woke mind virus. I don't know if you remember when he said that. But, the World Health Organization says one of the greatest threats to human health is what they call misinformation. So the first thing I would alert people to understand is we're in a new era. We're in a war of words, if you will. And clearly propaganda is in the open. It's operating in the open. And so what propaganda is when one person or organization wants to gain leverage over someone else. They want to force their opinions or their methods or their way of living onto somebody else. And so there are 6 propaganda terms that now I think as soon as we hear them, we need to reject them. I don't think we should say them or engage with it, but we should recognize what people are doing. Misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, anti-vaxxer, anti-science, and conspiracy theorists. All of those terms are terms that I don't think we should use. They certainly don't belong in medical science, but now in 2021, misinformation became a National Library of Medicine mesh term, a search term. And there are misinformation indices that have been developed. So you could be examined or judged based on this indice and then be declared that you have some mental problem. This is a slippery slope. I reject all of that. I think anytime you hear that, people should understand that propaganda is occurring. Now, you hear those terms a lot more on mainstream media, a lot less on independent media. So people have learned, listen, I've got to do their own research. You can't go on mainstream media and have people slandering one another by using the term misinformation. Go to independent media, start talking about the studies like we're doing here. And then people need to see things for their own eyes. If they're told something, boy, you better be able to verify it with your own eyes. Because I think in many ways all over the world, there's a deception manifesto going on. And, for a while, I was the chief of cardiology at the University of Missouri. Missouri is right in the middle of the country. It's got a great mantra. It's called the Show Me State. Like, I would have to see it. So I have to see things for myself before I buy into it. I'm just because somebody shows me an image on social media or someone tells me that something is going on in the world, if I can't verify it, then I'm going to be skeptical. And I think that's the way we have to be right now. The basic principles of medicine are, solid. Medicine, and I wrote a book on this, vaccines, mythology, ideology, and reality. This is a bad part of medicine, vaccines. And we found that out with the COVID pandemic. This is an area where the medical orthodoxy is wrong. I gave a Chautauqua lecture this year earlier, And there's two other major areas where medicine was wrong in history. One was cocaine. In 1860 to 1920, every major drug company product and everything the doctors prescribed for patients was derivatives of cocaine. That was a disaster. Everyone got addicted. And then smoking, 1920, 1978. Virtually every doctor smoked. They gave out cigarettes in the office. The tobacco companies marketed the doctors and nurses. They were wrong. They were wrong on cocaine and wrong on smoking, and they're wrong on vaccines. And in our book, Vaccines, Mythology, Ideology, and Reality, we go over this. It's basically a field of medicine that has made bold, unsupported claims. It operates off of fear of infectious diseases and asks people to take shots based on faith, based on an ideology. Now, there is some reality. Some vaccines have done some good in terms of dropping case counts, but many now, the big area in health freedom is to question this vaccine narrative because, the COVID vaccine campaign ripped
and
the Band-Aid
that
off
leads
this.
to the distrust factor. It's if what else had they been lying to us about? And I appreciate the encouragement to exercise prudence and just slow down for a moment. So over the years, we've had many people write to us.
Indeed.
For many different reasons. Mostly to encourage us.
Throw tomatoes. Yeah. There was some tomatoes thrown at us.
Mostly it's to encourage us.
Yes.
There's also a lot of basically saying, you're right, Canada's crazy. It's Satan. A lot of people asking questions. Some people we had to rebuke them on the air because they're ridiculous.
We did that once or twice.
But mostly really good stuff. So in light of the 350th episode and kind of my departure, someone wrote a decently long, encouraging, and I think really great email that I want to read in its totality for our audience, because I think it's this represents the kind of messages and encouragement that we got, whether it was via email or in person at various conferences, or when someone awkwardly taps me on the back while I'm shopping at Costco because they hear me talking on the phone and recognize my voice from the podcast. Moments like that.
Yeah.
So here's the email from Dave Coulter. He's actually a friend of mine all the way back from Kingston. So Dave writes this: I can't say your departure from Liberty Dispatch is like the sting of rejected young love, as it has been reportedly been for some. A friend of mine messaged me saying, hearing you go is like hearing my high school girlfriend break up with me. And Dave saying, I can't, it's not really that for me. Even still, it does have the feel of great loss, like a valued friend and counselor moving far away. Not gone forever, but now just that much more remote. I looked forward each week to you guys, Winsome Andrew and Presuppositional Matt, the dynamic duo, viciously eviscerating the lies and the lying liars that lie them in light of Christian truth. Hearing the pair of you boldly call out the weekly barrage of wickedness has been a source of great consolation to me, and I suspect a great many others. Perhaps your take on the current spiritual war did not have a wider appeal. No, they might say, don't call out sin and sinners in that way. Why not? It would not be Christianly, they might reply. Really? Thank you so much for doing so, and doing so in exactly that way, just as Christ himself did. The seed of Satan needs to be publicly called out as the sons of depravity that they are. The vicious, venomous snakes need to be called out as vipers. The tables need to be overturned, and the merchants of greed and lies need to be publicly flogged in exactly the way you did. If anything, I think you held back a little bit. Typically, you did this with a good dose of humor to make the truth easier to swallow. Your tone was perfect. In all this, you have fulfilled the commandment to imitate Christ. Even now, he says, well done, good and faithful servant. The devil needs to be laughed at. Being mocked is the one thing he can't abide. Loss of legitimacy is how he loses his power. All this to say your contribution to furthering the kingdom of heaven was effective, and you will be sorely missed. I expect you have good reasons for your departure, which I'll talk about in a bit. Perhaps a guest appearance from time to time is possible, though, with the right financial incentive. You may be moving away.
You added
but you
that
should
part.
Not, I did. You may be moving away, but you should not be a stranger. Come and visit once in a while. That's from Dave Coulter. So
thank you, Dave. That was
thanks,
wonderful.
Dave. And I agree with, and you already made mention. You've already alluded to this. The last part there, Matt.
Yeah.
Is I've understood part of our show as putting a big red clown nose on evil tyrants and laughing at them and mocking them as an effective way to basically say to people, they're really not that scary. They try to be scary. They try to be threatening, and they try to take things away from us. And they did take a lot away from us, and they will continue to take a lot away from us, and they're going to keep making their play. But at the end of the day, they're not that scary.
Yeah.
They're just men.
Sometimes
they're not God.
Yeah. Sometimes you got to say, who is this uncircumcised Philistine?
Yeah.
We come in the name of the Lord. These guys are fools. And that's what we tried to do. And I appreciate Dave for his words. And I second him in saying you should come back and don't be a stranger. We love to have you on. But yeah, I think that's great. Andrew, I know I was sharing with you just recently when I was in Niagara recently for a conference. Multiple people came up to me and we're just saying how thankful they are that we do the show. And again, kind of recognize my voice. They're like, hey, why do I know you? Or, oh, yes. Okay. This, so it's been pretty cool to see how many people we've been able to touch with the show. And though our audience is relatively small, it's fierce. And it's pretty amazing that we get to touch people's lives in the way that we have, and that people can come up to us and say how much they appreciate it. And, in one case, a guy, we helped him basically save his career, save his job, think through things, appeal, or be an advocate for himself with actually hard facts and data. And, some of the things that LCC did, we got people in real churches, in real communities that they're still taking part of, right? We help defend them in court. We help them put the letters before their bosses. All these things are things that really took place and that real people in our country are really thankful for. And it's been amazing to be a part of that. And I think, when we're just sitting in our little studios in our houses doing this, we can kind of forget that there's actual real names and faces that are behind the audience count that are really valuing the content. And I'm thankful for guys like Dave and so many of the people we've been able to meet to discuss how valuable the show is and how important it is for them. And that's why, Andrew, though I'm sad you're leaving, I'm, the Lord willing, I'm going to press forward in bringing the same content that people know and love, because regardless of its popularity, the numbers, anything like that, that's never why we've done it. We've done it because it's something that we all value and we all think needs to exist in Canada. And that's why we'll continue to press on.
So one of the guests that we had on several times in several different settings is Pastor Aaron Rock, and is a testament to his knowledge and his skill. He's someone who can have a discussion about a great many topics and do so with an expertise and a knowledge and a wisdom that's admirable. So we can talk with him about theology. We can talk with him about leadership. We can talk with him about the reality of nationhood and what it means to be patriotic. Or as we got to discuss with him at length in this interview, we can talk about the importance of Christians running for office and principles for them to consider in engaging in statecraft politics. So here's a little portion of the discussion that we had with Pastor Aaron Rock. It's always good to have with us on the Dispatch, friend of the show, Aaron Rock. Aaron is the founding and preaching pastor at Harvest Bible Church and fellow for church leadership at the Ezra Institute. He has served in youth ministry as an associate pastor, a youth pastor, a church planter, a college and seminary professor, a chaplain, a conference speaker, a lead pastor, a karate master, a small hobby farm master, all sorts of things that he has done. He and his wife, Susie, have been married since 1995. Together, they have 5 adult children, 4 grandchildren, and his final of his adult children has been engaged recently. So that's wonderful news. So
Praise
soon
God.
all 5 of your kids are married off. Aaron's podcast, Leadership Now, can be found on Beachhead Media, and it's one of those particular episodes that we want to lead our discussion today. Brother, thank you so much for joining us. It's always great to have you. And this special, our 350th episode, we thought, who do we want to get on for this extravaganza?
Our best friends.
We have to have Aaron on. He's got to be on the show.
Awesome. Well, hey, guys, congratulations for 350 episodes. That's more episodes than I've recorded, so good on you. Thanks for having me.
And technically, it's only 350 of the actual, like, Dispatch and kind of aside from interviews. But, yeah, we've done a lot. It's God's blessed it. So, yeah, it's been wonderful. And thankfully, you've helped us produce a lot of that content with your appearances on the show. I think this is, maybe a handful of times, Andrew. Do you know the actual number?
It's been a while. He's certainly one of our most reoccurring guests, which says either he sees how much help and work needs to be done and he's trying to help us get our act together, or he just appreciates a good spicy conversation. Either way, we'll take it. So, Aaron,
I was going to say I have a real heart for lost causes. So that's why
I know. I feel it. So, Aaron, it's no surprise to you that Canada is in a very interesting moment right now where the last number of years there's been the creeping anti-Christ, anti-Christian, very persecution-friendly legislation. Most recently, the dancing of Bill C-9, which essentially looks like the outlawing of the Bible because of what we say about marriage and sexuality. But this is no different than Bill C-4, than other bits of legislation we've seen. So we're moving in that way. We've seen a relative disengagement of Christians, evangelicals, wholesale in politics and really engaging in the culture, even in evangelism, which is supposed to be our thing. Gospel witness is supposed to be our thing. But what it's looked like is a lot of people putting baskets over their candles and salt losing its saltiness. So Canada's in a moment where we are a historic Christian nation, and we are the Dominion of Canada, and yet we see as becoming increasingly anti-Christian. And those who bear the name of Christ are just kind of folding over like wet pieces of paper. But yet within that, there's a contingent of believers in this country and churches who are actually doing the work that we think needs to be done in order to not just survive, but to really thrive in the coming decades and continue to advance the kingdom of God and join in Christ's work in building his church. So when I think about how Christians can practically engage, like actually being practical, tangible ways, you're close to, if not at the top of the list of people who think in those terms and are able to counsel people to do likewise. So we wanted to have you on, and really the question to frame our discussion, and it's a broad question, but we can touch on various parts, is what do Christians need to be thinking about practically, like on the ground, in order to thrive and build and flourish for the next several decades, the next several generations in our country? What are things that if we're not doing, we need to start doing? And what are the things that if we are kind of doing correctly, here are principles that you would give to help direct it even more to be even most effective? And we can start in any of the different spheres or realms, but I want to offer to our audience, get to work in these ways. Start now if you haven't already, because we have a lot of work ahead of us. We have generations of work ahead of us in this country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you're touching down on a very real and important issue. And as I've thought a little bit about why it is that so few Christians are addressing these issues, I think in large part it's because too many of us are tied to the state for our livelihood or for our relationships and friendships. It tends to be clergy who are paid by the church that are the most free to speak out against the issues of our day, and or people that can't get a job, probably aren't particularly employable, and spend all their time sitting in front of their television reading internet news that are the most vocal about such matters, but they're not always necessarily the most intelligent or thoughtful and best representatives of our goals and our mission. And so I want to say at the outset that one of the things we're going to have to be thinking through and changing in the lives of our churches, we need to get the average run-of-the-mill Christians more engaged in bringing about cultural change. And that's going to require them to disengage on a certain level from being so beholden to the state. So they're going to need to be more thoughtful in terms of the kind of jobs that they take, in terms of the kind of relationships or political affiliations that they forge in order to extricate themselves from the obligations that the state is going to place upon them, which essentially is going to result in the increased muzzling or silence of good people. And so I also think that most pastors are probably ill-equipped to think through these issues, and that's not meant to infuriate or to paint with too broad of a brush. But the reality is that most pastors, oftentimes Christians look to pastors to do everything, to preach the word of God, to counsel, to lead in building projects, to fix the world, to tell us who to vote for. It's not going to happen. Most pastors don't have the tools in their toolbox to do that. It's not part of their giftedness or not part of their training. So we really need to go beyond assuming that the clergymen are going to fix Canada, and we need to find ways to mobilize your average Joe Blow Christian to engage in a very practical level in reforming and reforging the cultural milieu and context within which we live. And so there's lots of different spheres we want to talk about.
I want to jump off the podcast you did recently, because that's the one that, of all of the spheres, I would say that's the one that historically it's been the Christians don't touch it, pastors don't preach about it. Let's just whatever, let the world fall apart, let Satan have his kingdom, and we'll just worry about the walls of our church. And that is Christian political engagement. This is the one I think that is the most contentious in terms of the willingness of pastors and Christians to even think about the insanity of a real Christian running for office and doing political quote unquote groundwork. So let's start there.
Okay. So there's two levels we have to look at this at. The one is to reshape people's thinking, and that means you got to tackle the lies, and you got to replace them with truth. And then the second step, which I think is where we often fall short, is the practical. So I want to get involved. What do I actually do? Like starting today, what do I actually do? And I like to think a lot about that because I think it's a bit of a void in the conversations that take place. So, but let me just touch briefly on some of the lies. So the first thing we have to teach people is that literally, in the most literal sense, every square inch of creation belongs to the Lord Jesus Christ. And that means that the political establishment belongs to the Lord Jesus Christ, the medical establishment, the scientific establishment, not just the ecclesial establishment, but Jesus Christ has laid claim to be the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, which is, I'm not sure I could think of a more politically charged statement than that he has laid claim to be the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. You can't read that without seeing the implications for that in the political sphere.
Isn't it totally absurd that we struggle with this as Christians when that is like the chief title that is given to our Lord? And when you're even reading the book of Acts, when you're taking in the New Testament, what are the scriptures that are quoted the most? Genesis, Deuteronomy, Psalms, Isaiah, like all these things that are talking about the sovereignty of God, his lordship over all of creation, and how Jesus is, God in flesh, the God man, the King of Kings, the Lord, the ruler of the kings. Like, it's so central to the biblical narrative. But you're talking about the lies that have seeped into our thinking have really undermined who God is and who Christ is in their essence, right? And it's bewildering that we've got to this place, but that's why we must upend these lies.
Yeah, and then Romans 13 is the most basic categorical job description of the magistrate or the civil ruler. And it doesn't go into, obviously, an extensive job description about taxation rates, whether you should pave roads in asphalt or concrete. But there we have the king, or we'll just broaden it out and say that the magistrate, depending on what political climate you're in, who is God's servant, whose most basic job description is to oversee justice. So to penalize the evildoer and to reward the righteous. Now, if you think about it, in order to even make that statement, there has to be a foundation upon which righteousness and justice is even definable. And implicit to Paul's teaching there is the assumption that it's the word of God. It's God that decides who is evil, who is righteous, and what it means to penalize or to reward a person that's committing whatever act they might be committing. And so there again, you have an emphasis upon God's engagement or involvement in what we would call the political sphere. Now, the main lie that has been taught incessantly since most of us were little boys, and perhaps even before that, is that politics is either spiritually neutral, or that because there is an accepted separation between the church and the state, that religion, quote unquote religion, or preaching or teaching have no place in public discourse or public dialogue, especially in the political sphere. Interestingly, it's impossible to live that way because in the absence of the word of God and the categories of scripture informing our view of the value of life or what liberty is or how justice is to be enacted, other ideologies or religious perspectives will come in to fill the gap. You literally cannot have a spiritually neutral state. And I think one of the benefits, if I could say this, of living at such a time as this is that the mask has been ripped off, and only someone who's willfully choosing to live in ignorance or to embrace lies would not be willing to admit that. Almost every major bill that we see in the House of Commons over the past, I'm going to say about 6 years, is very much predicated upon a religious basis. And unfortunately, it's an anti-Christian religious basis.
So the question that I'm sure people have been, or questions that I'm sure people have been wondering are these two. Number one, what's the future of Liberty Dispatch? And number two, why, Andrew? Why? Some sort of variation of that. So I don't know which one we want to tackle first. Do you have any thoughts, Matt? Do you want to flip a coin? Which one do you want to do first?
Well, I think the one on people's minds probably the most is why, Andrew, why? So I will kick it over to you. You can answer that question, and then I'll hopefully fill people in on exactly what things are going to look like in the future. Is still kind of up in the air, but we do have plans moving forward. So why, Andrew? Why now? Why at this moment?
So a couple of years ago, we moved from Kingston, and our move was influenced by wanting to plug in to a really, really, really good church. Well, let me rewind a little bit more. So our church in Kingston, we decided that being in Kingston proper, we didn't think that was the wisest decision with seeing what was happening in the city, seeing the way they responded to COVID-related things. So we thought, let's get out of the city, and more properly, why don't we merge with another church? Actually, Tim Tyso's former church will merge with Evergreen Chapel, and we'll kind of form a stronger beachhead area in kind of that northern Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston area. Randy Hillier's out that way. At least a couple other pastors and churches were faithful. We had a good kind of network going. We thought, let's merge and we'll be stronger. And in that merge, the teaching pastor at the church at Evergreen Chapel, now Evergreen Bible Chapel, I said, in a merge, you can't have two preaching pastors, and the church couldn't afford double staff. I was on full time with LCC. So I said, well, you take over as teaching elder, you be on, staff at the church, you get your salary from the church. I'll take a sabbatical and I'll serve as a lay elder because LCC is paying my bills. So that was the plan. But as the move approached, because I'm not going to be serving as a teaching elder, because I'm taking a sabbatical, because my work is totally mobile, and because, my wife was pregnant with twins and we were thinking about really the next 40 years of my life, we started praying and discussing with others, well, is there somewhere else in the country that we should be going? Is there a move we should make? So we hummed and hawed about a few different places in Ontario. I knew I didn't want to leave Canada, and I knew Ontario was where all the action was, and all the best relationships I built was also in Ontario with other pastors. So, we spent a summer visiting with every church in Ontario that stayed open that we knew of. We weren't considering all of them, but it was a wonderful summer. And in that time, we had decided that we wanted to dig deep somewhere where A, there was a solid church, B, there was a legitimate kind of beachhead type initiative where the church is thinking about businesses and the church is thinking about the political sphere, where there's the presence of a classical Christian school. So we considered all those things. So we moved. Our family moved. And in the process of moving, which was big for us, we had, 3 kids out of the womb, 2 kids in the womb. It was a big move, hours away from Kingston. And in the process of that, opportunities began to present themselves. The first one was I was asked if I wanted to teach at the classical Christian school where my kids were attending. There also became other opportunities to get more intentionally involved politically. So a few people from our church started an electoral district association for the Christian Heritage Party, which, if you're unfamiliar with that, is basically a hub for a political party. And that hub will support candidates when they run in elections, will fund candidates, will do their own fundraisers. And the EDA is active in between elections to grow membership and to raise funds and just be a presence in the community so that when election time comes, they're familiar. So a number of us started in EDA. I serve on the EDA as vice president and prayer director, and I'm teaching at the school. And I also, because I love the local church, started using my gifts and abilities in the context of the local church to serve in various lay capacities. Oh, and also the twins showed up. So all this is happening. And at this point, my work with LCC comes to a close because LCC closes up operations at the end of 2024. But the podcast is going strong. I'm also trying to build my own Substack, my own blog, my own writing, which has been a great source for me in collecting my thoughts and getting stuff out. So all this is happening. And as we approach this last summer, my wife and I begin discussing, in order to best position ourselves for where our family's at and where our church is at, is it time to consider stepping back from Liberty Dispatch? Not because of anything wrong, not because of issues with the funding, the sponsors, the timing, none of that stuff, but just sensing moving on from that and then focusing more exclusively locally what's happening around us. So we prayed, we discussed for several months, and then finally, by the time we got to the end of the summer, my wife and I decided, this is looking at what the Lord has for us here, looking at all that's going on. The focus needs to be way more intentionally on what's happening locally, because there's a lot happening locally where we are. So Matt and I, we recorded on a Wednesday night. And then at the end of that episode, so this would have been in late August after we recorded, I said, hey, Matt, Catherine and I, let me tell you where I'm at. We've been thinking and praying and discussing, and I'm going to step back from the podcast at the end of this calendar year, so 2025. And I talked a little bit about what I was thinking and why. That was on a Wednesday. The next day, which was Thursday morning, and I've told Matt this after the fact. The next day, Thursday morning, I got a call from the dean of our school who said, hey, Andrew, would you like to take over as the director of academics and administration at the school? which basically means overseeing, curating, choosing, assessing all of our curriculum. It also means dealing with the chapel and the schedule and all the administrative stuff that we would need as a school. That's finances, that's registrations, planning, all that sort of stuff. And I perceived that was the Lord's way of saying, this is why, Andrew, I was leading you to step back from the dispatch, is because I was going to give this to you. And I'm no prophet, but I perceive that had I not made that decision and had that conversation, that I wouldn't have gotten that phone call, because the Lord is at liberty to raise anyone up for any of his purposes. And the dean probably would have called someone else and the Lord would have continued his work. But in this instance, because I think we heeded the direction and the leading of the Lord, the next day it was, now here's some more responsibility for you. And so that was just affirmation that we'd made the right call, that it was time to move on. And so what's next for me is I continue to be the grade 7-8 teacher at our school. I continue to teach Bible, theology, worldview, and rhetoric to the high schoolers. I oversee the academics and the administration of our school. I'm serving in men's ministry at our church. I'm helping out with life group ministries at our church. We are growing our EDA and plan on running candidates in all 4 ridings and actually being a presence, a Christian political party and Christian politician presence in our area. And like I mentioned, we have 5 kids, 2 twins that are over 2, and it's wild and busy and fun, and just is a very special season for us. And I want to take it all in. And then lastly, I've taken a little bit of a break from my personal blogging, mostly because the last 2 months have been an absolute gong show for me. It's just been bananas because it's been everything. It's all the things that have been happening. Mm-hmm. So my plan in the new year is to focus a little more time on my writing. And so, as I've said many times, because I'm not one to shy away from shameless self-promotion, my plan early in the new year is to get back, and I have some really great ideas to come out hard with my blog, mapletheonomist.substack.com. And I plan on releasing weekly articles again and really, really going hard into my writing, because that's a great outlet for me. And I'll have a little more time for it. So if you're thinking, hey, Andrew, we're not going to hear you anymore, there's no podcast stuff, but we're still interested in what you're thinking, how you're doing, what you're saying, we still like some of the content, then I would encourage you to head over to themapletheonomist.substack.com, subscribe. If you become a paid subscriber, there's some really great interviews and content that's banked in the past you'll have access to, but becoming a free subscriber, gets you the updates when I write my weekly article. So that's kind of what's next for me. Lots of good stuff going on, and almost all of it very narrowly focused on what's happening in our community, mm-hmm. which I think is the next play for me, and that's where I need to be focusing my energy. And the Lord has affirmed it, that these are all the right decisions. So that's me.
Yeah, and as for me, I'm not sure how much I've said it on the program, but I'm currently a pastor elder over the last year and a half, about 17, 18 months. I've planted a church here locally in Manitoba. So that's been taking up a lot of my time, a lot of my schedule, with all the various hats that you have to wear as a pastor elder in a small community church that's growing. And so there's been a lot of work that's gone into that. There still is a lot of work that's going into that. And I have a lot of those responsibilities. So when you talk about localism, Andrew, that rings very true to me. And, you joined a community there that's really off and running, that's been established, that has all those things in place. But that wasn't much an option here in Manitoba. And that is why we've undertaken to start a church and look to starting a classical Christian school. We're building all the institutions that you're talking about in the area. So that's all that's on the docket for me, as well as podcasting, right? Podcasting was never a full-time gig for you and I. It's something that we did, and that we do, because we need to think through and process these things that are happening in our country as Christians, thinking biblically from a biblical worldview. That's always what it's been about. Lord willing, the sponsors have been gracious. They're going to continue on with us. We're moving forward. We're planning to continue to do LDs. Lord willing, you'll come on the podcast. I'll be able to get you every now and again, Andrew, when you have time. And Brother Alan Armstrong, who I've been doing Money Mondays with, we're paused until the new year, but he's going to be coming on more regularly. We're just moving forward. And I've also thought about doing, instead of an extended hour-long podcast with various segments that typically runs best with multiple people, of just doing short content on kind of topic specific stuff as well. So things as far as LD are up in the air. So stay tuned. It's going to be a little bit different. It might be a little different than you're used to, but I think it's going to have the same fundamental elements with whoever's on with me or whatever I'm dealing with. We're going to be touching on various aspects of politics and culture in the Canadian landscape, from a biblical perspective, and that's what we're going to do. So that's the plan for the LD moving forward. We'll still have continued wonderful guests. That's all going to remain the same, and you'll be able to find us at ldcanada.substack.com. So that's kind of what to expect next from all of us. And, just so everybody knows, Andrew and I aren't done working together. We got some irons in the fire too. So it won't be in the same capacity in the same way, but we're not going away, and our collaboration is not going to end with this podcast. So that is what you can expect next, and it's a little bit live, but we just ask that you would continue to pray for us and all that we're doing to advance the kingdom of Christ here in Canada.
So the final interview is also a treat. Great first discussion with him when we had him on to discuss the CBC hit piece where they labeled Voldemort as the evil father of Christian nationalism, and he's the grandfather of Reconstructionism.
Was it?
And
can I ask you a question, Andrew? Was the CBC kind of on the cutting edge? Because now Doug's done interviews with just about everyone, and it was like the CBC.
Well, they didn't interview him; but they just mentioned him.
No, yeah. I know, but I'm just saying, like the CBC was, before he was the spokesperson for Christian nationalism, so called. The CBC identified him as such. So
but they focused more on calling him a proponent of Reconstructionism. That was really
that's right. That's right.
So I got to meet Doug in person when I was in Moscow, and I spent a week there. I was on Cross Politic in person. I got to sit down with Doug and chat with him for a bit. I got a $6,000 ArriveCan ticket when I came back because I don't bow to tyrants.
A cherry on top of
that was just great. So we want to play you a portion of the discussion we had with Pastor Doug, and you're definitely gonna want to get this whole discussion because it was a lot of fun, and I also think it's what we need to be thinking about in the days ahead. There is a legitimate concern that men will be passing right over biblical Christianity into the young, restless, red-pilled, extreme, woke right, dank right category. Mm-hmm. And if we're not ready to snatch these men before they pass us into that place, we may just lose them forever. That is a deep, dark hole that's tough to get out of. So thinking through what do we need to do to be effective in saving our brothers from another kind of destruction this was a part of the discussion, you're going to want to get this whole thing. So here's just a portion of the interview we're able to have with Pastor Doug Wilson. Well, friends, it is a tremendous pleasure and a privilege for me to welcome on this very special 350th and my final episode of Liberty Dispatch, Douglas Wilson. Pastor Doug is the pastor of Christ Church in Moscow, Idaho, but you know that if you follow our show. He has served there for over 40 years. He's also written a number of books on cultural issues and blogs at dougwills.com. He and his wife, Nancy, have 3 kids, 18 grandkids, and 5 great-grandkids with whom they have a lot of fun. Pastor Doug, I really am thankful that you took the time to join us today. I'm anticipating a fun and sarcastic kind of conversation. I'm looking forward to it.
Happy to do it. Thank you for the invite.
So, Pastor Doug, we have talked a little bit, not only in interview form, but outside of that. There's been growing discussions about this movement on the far right, if you will, the dank right, as you've called them, the young, restless, and red-pilled, as we've called them on our show. And it's the sort of thing where I was watching James White talk about this, where it seems that it's sprung up out of nowhere, that it wasn't particularly on many people's radars, at least is not a concern. I mean, 10 years ago, Nick Fuentes was just some crazy anti-Semite that had weird views, and, Ben Shapiro dealt handily with him. But now it looks like that's not actually the case. It looks like their popularity is as big as it's ever been and has actually eclipsed several of their critics. I'm thinking of the Daily Wire, for example. So I wanted to get your thoughts on where this came from, or why is it that seemingly it's like it's popped up out of nowhere when we know that's not the case. Something was brewing. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on the genesis of this whole far, far Nazi sympathetic dank right movement that has really bloomed in the last, let's say, 4 or 5 years.
Yeah. So first, I think there really is a development of that nature on the right. I've talked to people who are affected by online personalities and podcasters and whatnot. There is a there, and there's a reason for pastors to be concerned and to address it. At the same time, I was just looking at a couple of news stories this morning. This is broken over the last few days, where a deep dive analysis of Nick Fuentes' followers indicated that much of his support has been artificially inflated by overseas bots.
Yeah, I saw that too.
Basically, this ties in with something I've warned about and cautioned about from the very beginning of the rise of the dank right people. And that is, I'm not saying, let's say there's a goat Joe Schmo, going on about the Jews and blacks and all of that stuff. And I would say to him, okay, I'm not saying you're a Fed. I don't know that you're a Fed. But if you were a Fed, would you be behaving any differently? Right? In other words, I think a lot of the megaphone that the dank right has been given is an op. So I don't think the dank right itself is an op. I think there are real people who really have these problems wound tight around their axle. But I think the prominence, the influence, the traffic, the numbers, the views, I think that's an op.
So is the goal to get us to take the bait, as you've said before? Is the goal in the same way that they had alleged undercover FBI agents on January 6th in order to drum up this kind of excitement and this hatred, in order that the response then gives the state what it wants, which is essentially to crack down as tyrants?
Yeah, I think this is all part of the same thing. This is an attempt to destabilize and discredit the conservative resistance to the deep state. So the feds who are involved in the J6 thing, what they were wanting to do is to get an overreaction against the establishment that they could have justification for cracking down on. All right. I think this op is a little bit different in that it's let's you and him fight. So this is designed to get conservatives fighting with one another, which has erupted in the last few years.
It's been very successful in the last month, especially.
Correct. It's been a very successful op. Nick Fuentes, Candace, all of this stuff has gotten Christians and Christian conservatives going at one another. Now, the people who really are twisted, I think Nick Fuentes himself is a mess, and I don't mind going after him, but he's influencing people that are not in the same place spiritually where he is. And there are good people who believe what Candace is saying, or who are swayed by it and upset by it. I don't know what to think anymore. That kind of thing. And I think this as an op has been strikingly successful. That doesn't mean that it's all smoke and mirrors. There really is a there that has to be addressed. But I don't think we should set our hair on fire.
So I want to ask you a little bit about Christian nationalism, but before we kind of make that turn, I have one last question. And as I've been seeing what's happening over the last 5 years, as the medical industrial complex and as the civil government, as the mask, no pun intended, that's covered their face has been ripped off. And now we see that rather than being civil servants, we have people that are serving themselves, that there's an amassing of power and wealth and incredible exchange of money. And often it's at the expense of the people that they have been elected to serve. They're not doing their duty at all. So I've seen that shift happen. And one of the things I've seen in people is now they're saying, okay, we can't trust anything. We've been lied to about everything. It's all an unhinged skepticism. And then these men are now slowly making their drift toward, let's say, conservatism. And my concern is, and this is what we've seen in the last, couple years, is they're flying right past biblical conservatism into the arms of the dank right. And so maybe not so much for the pastor, for the elder, but speak to the everyday guy who goes to a church, he loves his family, and he sees his friends, he sees other people, and they're making this journey that they are working from, let's say, we got to deal with the paradigm, but they're working from a more kind of center, moderate position. They've been awoken to the reality of what's really going on in the spiritual realm and among our elites and institutions. And now they're beginning their march to the right, and we need to snatch them before they fly right past us into a dangerous place. What do we say to those guys who are seeing their friends and family members and brothers move in this direction, but they might not have a platform or a pulpit or the ability to address it publicly or with that kind of authority that some have? How do we encourage these men to quite literally save their brothers from going way off the cliff?
Yeah. I think you've described the situation quite nicely, because what's happening is people are leaving the progressive left and they're driving right by. There are millions of evangelical Christians in this country, millions of them, and so why are they driving right by these biblical conservatives on the freeway to drive off to the dank right? Well, it's because in our stretch of the highway we have refused to put any signs up. There are no exit signs. Because what happens is that you've got all these pastors who, many of them are very conservative in their cultural expectations. They really are conservative, but they've been taught to detach it from and not talk about, basically submerge it. That's private. You can be conservative and it's private, and the church is just about the gospel, narrowly considered, and so you have the gospel-centered movement. Well, the problem with being gospel-centered is not where the center is, because the gospel should be central. The issue is where the circumference is. When you say the gospel is central, I'd say central to what? Well, it's central to all of life, and that includes politics. That includes culture. So the model for this would be Charlie Kirk. Okay, he was a person who was not shy at all about his Christian convictions, and he wasn't shy at all in the same Q&A session in talking about immigration or the various political issues. He talked about them all together, and that was worldview thinking. That was a worldview Christian approach, and it was radically successful. So successful that he had to be taken out. Okay, so if you don't want these young men driving by your stretch of the highway and going on to the abyss, then put up some signs. There's worldview Christianity here. We will teach you how to marry, how to have kids. We will talk to you about how to think like a Christian citizen. We will talk to you about being a churchman. We want to fit you out for life, right? And we're not going to be shy about tackling certain subjects. And I think one of the blessings that has come out of the Charlie Kirk murder is that many pastors and Christian leaders have come to realize that there's no law against doing what Charlie Kirk was doing. Let's talk about all the things.
Yeah, so let's talk about one of those things, and I'm glad you brought up Charlie Kirk, because the reality of Christian nationalism, right? So in the height of the COVID madness, in response to what was going on, here you had Christians and groups of people saying what we need to do to be ready for the days and years ahead is we need to start Christian classical schools. We need to build businesses. We need to plant churches. We need to train pastors. We need to engage. And we kind of had this idea of a Christian nationalism, which was, in my estimation, properly defined, a good thing. That yes, we want biblical principles to be infused in and influence every sphere of society. We want legislators making good laws based on God's law. We want businesses operating according to biblical principles. We want schools teaching from a biblical worldview. We want all of that. But what we've seen in the last little bit is it looks like the label, rather than being kind of used as a bludgeoning tool against us, Christian nationalism is synonymous with fascist and alt-right. And we've been saying, no, that's not us. Well, it turns out now there are those actual people who are also claiming the title Christian nationalism, and they're taking it they're the people that we're trying to save people from going past us into that camp. Do you think, in light of, let's say, how the term is now being used, or who's kind of taken the term and really how it's understood by most people, combined with maybe some of the historical baggage that comes with nationalism, do you think that we are at a place, or we're soon coming to a place where maybe it's time to shed off the Christian nationalist title and maybe embrace or move towards something else? Or do you think, no, we can there's still something redeemable here. We can still work with this. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, I've said all along that if Christian nationalism comes to mean Nick Fuentes, and Time magazine makes him the Christian nationalist of the year, and he's on the cover, and the fighting over the legitimacy of the term and who owns the term, if that's over, I'm not going to hang on to Christian nationalism. I'm going to say fair with whatever it meant at one point in my advocacy of it. It doesn't mean that now. And so I'm going to find another name for what I'm doing, even though what I would be doing would be the same thing.
Right.
Oh, okay. I'm not going to clutch at the term just out of an arbitrary cussedness or stubbornness. That said, I still think it's an open question, because in the providence of God and by God's grace, I am the most well-known Christian pastor, Christian nationalist currently. Okay, so there are others who are doing their thing, podcasters who are doing their thing, but CNN and Wall Street Journal and New York Times, and when those guys want to get a comment from a Christian nationalist pastor spokesman, I get a call.
They go to Voldemort. That's who they go to.
Right. Yes.
And apparently now, I remember you saying this, apparently now your name can be said. We can invoke the name of Doug Wilson, and it's okay now. We don't have to worry about some evil spell being cast upon us.
Right. Not only so, but I am now the moderate. which is kind of disorienting for me. But so basically, I think that the battle over the term is still a hot one and ongoing. If I lose the battle, then so be it. But right now, it's pretty good.
Andrew, what a great discussion. It's awesome. I've had the pleasure of, talking with Doug a lot over the last month and a bit, because we're a candidating church with the CREC, the CREC that Doug was instrumental in founding. And it's just been so awesome to learn from him, to hear his wisdom, which was reflected in our discussion with him. And it dawned on me, Andrew, as we're kind of talking about these things, what would you say is, because I see the dank right, I see a lot of these shock jocks now, a lot of the stuff that you'll see on X and everything tend to be coming from our American friends down south. That though this exists in Canada, though we've seen these sorts of things in some of our circles and everything, what do you make of the fact that this seems to be more of a thing in the States, despite especially a lot of these men who would fall into this category not having suffered at the hands of the state anywhere near, so many of the men that we were involved with during COVID in the ways that we had to deal with things throughout the pandemic in Canada. Like, do you have a theory behind that, Andrew? Now that I have you here for one final time, I just want your thoughts.
Well, there's something, at least on the surface, that I would call symptomatic, that I think explains it. And that is, when you're thinking in Marxist categories, you have to have a chief villain or oppressor. That's central to the conflict theory. And in the United States, it is much easier for them to put Israel and Jews in that place because, one, a tremendous amount of money flows from the United States to Israel. I mean, Donald Trump just announced a defense budget, and it's something like $800 million or $600 million are going to Israel. So there's a ton of money that goes to Israel, which, I mean, I thought that they were a pretty strong independent nation needing right. It's funny that conservatives despise handouts that happen in the United States, but when it's given to another country, then they're fine with it. Then the handouts are appropriate. So that would be, there's that reality that there's a ton of money. It's also the case, and this isn't being anti-Semitic or conspiratorial, but the reality is there are Israeli actors that are seeking to influence American decisions for Israel's benefit. That would be the same with China and with Russia. That's not a big deal. We understand that they're Chinese actors, they're Russian actors that seek to influence the state in order to make decisions favorable to them. So I would say in the United States, they have put the Jews in place of the chief villain and oppressor at the top of the Marxist category list. And because that's the chief villain in the woke right ideology, in the United States, it's way easier to say, or it's way easier to look at some of the evidence and conclude, well, all this money goes to Israel. We have AIPAC, which all our senators are on the take. We have a ton of aid to Israel, Israeli influence. Why is it that they would say, look at, like they're going to say, look at the porn industry, look at all these different industries that are under Jewish control, look at the ton of money that atheistic Jews send to Marxist, LGBT, LMNOP things. So in the United States, they can at least attempt to point to all this evidence implicating the Jews and saying, look, they really are destroying America. The problem in Canada is we don't have that same villain, or at least we don't have that villain that has the influence on us. So Canada can't say, look at all the money we're sending to Israel. I mean, our former prime timer had hardcore anti-Semites in his cabinet. So it's not here in Canada. The villain is the chief villain is the CCP and their outsourced influence upon us. So I think that's one reason it's symptomatic, because you can, if the woke right has collectively agreed that the greatest evil are the Jews, then in Canada you can't really point to a ton of instances where the Jews are the source of problems or the evidence showing they're pushing Canada to do things to Canadian detriment but Israeli benefit. But I think they can do that much more easily in the United States. And so the villain is apparent, and there's more evidence that they can interpret to justify their claims. So I think that's one reason why. The other reason is, I would say, the real hard Marxist push, I think, has been greater felt in the States than in here. And therefore the woke right pushback, right, the point counterpoint, the action reaction is also greater. That's not to say we don't operate in Marxist categories in Canada, because we do.
Well,
but at the end of the day,
solely operate on Marxist categories in Canada.
Would be when the brains behind the Frankfurt School came to North America, they went to UC Berkeley and Columbia in New York, and they basically took the coasts and they took the most influential universities and started infiltrating post-secondary education in the United States. I think it's clearly the case that the way the transatlantic slave trade has been interpreted and the way it's been weaponized recently. So I think that's another reason that the real strong Marxist push has been greater down there. Therefore, you would expect the reaction to also be greater. I think those are two reasons, and we're not even dealing with, spiritual realm, psychological, emotion. I'm just thinking on the surface, I think there are two things I could point to say why it's way more of a deal in the United States than it is here.
Yeah. I think that's helpful. Well, Andrew, final thoughts on the episode, episode 350. Any final thoughts on your tenure as a co-host of the Liberty Dispatch? I'm sure you have many. I'm sure it's probably hard to articulate in a few words, but I want to give you the opportunity for the last time to kind of, bring us home, give us your conclusion, help us, gather our thoughts from everything that we've seen and heard in this 350 episode and throughout the time together.
So first I have a few thank yous. I want to, and we'll put this in ascending order. Okay. Ascending order. I'm very thankful for our guests that we've had who've informed the show and blessed the show. All of them. I've really appreciated them. Even the discussions that got a little bit more, the temperature was increased. Something about Bruce Party or Maxime Bernier or even Billboard Chris. Like even those discussions that get ramped up a little bit, I'm thankful for them.
Yeah.
I'm so thankful for our audience over the years who joined us in our LCC days and stuck with us, who've been supportive, whether it's financially, whether it's encouragement, whether it's sharing the show. I've been thankful, awkward as it is at times, for people to pull me in, basically as I'm out shopping because they recognize my face or my voice. And it's been great. And Matt, I am thankful for the time we've been able to do this together. I've enjoyed our banter, our discussions, the fact that it's really easy to make you laugh. So you say you're the straight man, but you're not the straight man. I'm the straight man. You're the one who's like, "Rah, that's you." I'm the straight man. I pull it together.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
I've been the straight man. I've been the Abbott. You've been the Costello.
Indeed.
It's been really great. And I mean, whether it's logistically, the editing, the post-production, making the episodes look infinitely better than I could have. I mean, I scrounged together a couple sloppy videos in Windows Movie Maker. That's about the extent of it. And pass it off as something well done.
Yeah, you've done a good job.
Sure, I'll take that. But yeah, no, I've been grateful for the time we've been able to do this together. So those are my thank yous. Then I have a category of something that's when I think about what's one of the things I've really appreciated about the show. One of the things that I think, what's going to stick with me? Let's say that. What's really going to stick with me?
Mm-hmm.
And I think what's going to stick with me are I can't even put a number on it. The number of Canadians legitimately who, as a result of our work, have actually positively had their lives changed and affected for the better forever. So I'm not exaggerating when I say, over the course of my time with both LCC and the Dispatch, I have fielded hundreds of emails of Christians in Canada looking for churches. And it's sad to say that a small percentage of those are people in the middle of Nowheresville who, other than getting them to move hours away, there's really nothing for them. But with the exception of that small percentage, by God's grace, I've been able to help hundreds of Canadians find good churches when they felt like they were alone and exiles and pariahs for whatever their convictions were. And now they are committed and involved at solid churches where otherwise they would have been lost. And the Lord allowed me to be a part of that. That's rich for me to experience that. It's also been the case, I know this for a fact, that several people have reached out. They were getting ready to leave. They were getting ready to make their way southward. And they either listened to an episode or a discussion and just felt the conviction of the Holy Spirit saying, you got to stay, you got to build, you got to fight. And a lot of these people have gone on to continue to strengthen their businesses and they're thriving. They've plugged in at their churches. That was also, the first time I heard someone say, we were going to leave, we listened to your episode, I played it to my wife, we hated your guts, and we're now here for the long haul. I actually thought that was incredible. I was very thankful for that.
Yeah.
I know many people have quit their jobs and started their own businesses and are doing well as a result of our time together. I know for a fact that parents have pulled their kids out of public school. Countless have pulled their kids out of public school, and are either homeschooling them or sending them to good, solid Christian schools.
Mm-hmm.
I was able to write about 50 religious exemption letters for people. Most of them were denied, but some of them were able to keep their job and finish their education. That's been special. I think, I say this carefully, I think that God in his mercy and his grace has allowed me to contribute to the building of his kingdom across our entire country, which is a great honor for me to have been a part of that, to fly out to BC and Nova Scotia and do these conferences and meet people who, felt like they knew me because I share things about my wife and kids and my crazy life.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that I have been able to, the Lord has used me to build his church and advance his kingdom across our country, and allowed me to be a voice for people who maybe didn't quite know what they were thinking or how to articulate it, but then heard it and thought, that's it. People who are able to weather the most difficult storms of losing jobs and school and loved ones, those who had to deal with being disinvited from holidays and feeling extremely alone. And he gave me a brief season to be a part of that across our country. And I'm very grateful for that. I know that, my focus now is turning entirely locally, and I'm anticipating that, more nationwide influence will slowly wane away as our episodes get more and more part of the historical record. but I'm fine with that. It was a season. It was a season the Lord had for me, and I'm grateful for the season. The last thing is nothing new. If you've listened to the show for any period of time, what I'm about to say is not going to surprise you at all, and it's not going to be anything new or different, but I've come to learn and believe even more so with every passing day that is a couple things. The first is, I think Canada is on its way to great moral, societal, economic ruin. And I think that there are very, very dark days ahead for us and for our children. And I'm more convinced of that than I've ever been. Now, with that in mind, though, I am exceedingly hopeful for the promise that the gates of hell will not prevail against the church.
Amen.
That the kingdom of God will expand. And just because it gets really dark and difficult doesn't mean that God's work is done. It just means that history is the ebbs and flows of success and failure and thriving and not. It's just that's the way that God writes the story. And God's at liberty to grow and advance his church anywhere he wants in the world. So I think Canada has very dark days ahead. I think that it's very difficult days ahead. But I think that if we're faithful and if we persist, that our grandchildren will be able to rebuild a glorious nation, and that we get to hand it off to them. And we don't get to see it. I'm not going to get to see it. I don't think I'm going to get to see it. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that because I'll be able to hand it off. And I take great joy in knowing that this is my lot. This is what he has for me. And I'm going to do it with all of my heart. And I'm going to hand it off all the way until I'm dead. So I think that's what's ahead of us. So in light of that, here's the not new thing. Okay, here are the not new things. Number one, you need to be daily engaging with the living and active, authoritative, sufficient, without error word of God every day. It is the food for your souls. It is what gives me the peace and the sanity to make sense of all. I was just reading in Isaiah earlier this week that God, in Isaiah 14, he's essentially pronouncing judgment against Judah. And over and over, God says, have I not purposed it? Will I not bring it about? Yes, I will. I will do it. But the encouragement is that he will actually restore his people, where his enemies will be destroyed and destroyed forever. And guess what? There's no more Babylon. There's no more Assyria. So being in God's word has a way of allowing me to not lose my mind and keep my soul intact. God has given us his word for food, for direction. He has the words of life. And if you're going to make it, if you're going to persevere to the end, then you need to be about consuming God's word every day. That's number one. Number two, you have to, if you have not, you have to be a part of a solid local church. You need to be committed. You need to be contributing to that church, your time, your gifts, your resources, your money, your prayers. You need to be all in. You need to jump all the way in and give everything you have to your church, because otherwise you're done. You're done. You're a sitting duck. It's over for you. Okay. So commitment to your local church. Please take the education of your children seriously. Get them out of public schools if you haven't already. Please. I was having coffee with a friend of mine today who's a teacher, and he's telling me about the stuff in the schools. I'm like, just get your kids out. Get your kids out yesterday. Take their education seriously. And that's nothing new. There's nothing new, but this is what is needed for the days ahead. And if I could continue to encourage you in the way that I have for the last 3 years, just do these things, be faithful in these things, and God will be faithful. God will bless it. And, I look forward to what the Lord's going to do in our country, in my life, in my family, in my church, in my community. I'm very excited about it. And I am grateful for what he's allowed me to experience and go through. And I know that in many ways it has served as training and equipping for what he has for me next, which, Lord willing, 40 years of culture, country building is a more difficult grind than the last 5 years. So that's what I got for you, friends.
Amen. Well, it's couldn't be more fitting. The same conclusion that we've gotten for the last many years with you, Andrew. And the great pleasure of all of this is, you and I are doing what we've counseled everybody else to do. And these are the very efforts that, regardless of it, if God sees fit to grant Canada repentance and turns things around, or if we are under that judgment you've spoken of, Andrew, these are still the tasks that we have to do. This is our lot in life. This is what the Lord would have us do to build his kingdom. And it's through the mundane, ordinary work that we're talking about that the crown rights of King Jesus are plastered and pushed forward, and his kingdom's made more manifest day by day by day through long faithfulness in the same direction. And that's what we've been about. That's what you've been preaching since day one. It might not be the sexy thing. It might not be what you hear from most people, but this is what the LD is always about. This is what the LD will continue to be about. If you like what we're doing, go over to our Substack, ldcanada.substack.com. You can get the extended interviews, all of that stuff over there. If you become a paid subscriber, please stay up to date with what we're going to do. We will be back in the new year in some sort of form. And Andrew, buddy, God bless you in all the many things you're doing. I pray his blessings upon you and your family. And it's just been such a pleasure to do this with you. So for your last episode, why don't you sign us off like we do?
Well, friends, it is for freedom that Christ has set you free. Stand firm, therefore, and do not again submit to a yoke of slavery. That's Galatians 5:1. Until next time. Liberty Dispatch has been brought to you by SDG Media. If you want to stay in touch with us on all things Liberty Dispatch, join our email list, or support the show, head over to ldcanada.substack.com.